All right, and we are live. Welcome everybody to Total Tabletop's world building, and we're down to just two of us today. Sorry we're a little late. Joe had some connection issues, but he was able to MacGyver some stuff, and now he's here. So we are able to have a stream, so that is perfect. I'm glad he was able to bust that out. I am Steelax. I do several things on the channel. But yeah, my name's Sean Steele. Live in the Pacific Northwest. The lead developer for this project. We are on episode 4 of this, and we still haven't picked a running title for this project yet, but we'll get into that more in a second.
All right. Well, I am Joe with the internet issues. Sorry to delay everybody, but we got it online. We're going to get running and talk about some good stuff today. I am not running as many things as Steelax, and in fact, not running anything at all. Just happy to be part of the community and helping where I can. So I've been excited to be part of world building here week to week, doing some great stuff. We are looking for new people, so if you're watching, you're interested, hit up our Discord, talk to some people, ask questions. I'm on there. Steelax is in there. People involved in the project will help you find your way to the right channel within the Discord, and we'll talk about it. And if you're serious about maybe joining in, we can talk further about that there. There is an application pinned, so if you're at least interested, you can fill it out there.
Perfect. Yeah, and we're looking for lots of different people. We're not looking for a specific set, like you got to fall into this criteria. We're wanting diversified experience. So whatever it is, either doesn't matter what systems you come from, whether you're new or a veteran of role-playing games, everybody brings something unique to the table. For example, veterans have a lot of different things, experiences to pull from, but new people, they may bring some fresh ideas that none of the veteran people would think of because they're so kind of set in different rule sets. We're looking for play testers, mechanics developers, lore writers, lots of different things. So we've got some applications in, so hopefully we can start getting people who are qualified in to join us. But we have some other great content on the channel. On Sundays we have Ages Past at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. That is run by AJ, and he's got a cast of players for that. And then Mondays we have Dark Heresy, Whispers of the Eye, which they are not streaming yet, but Joe's one of those players. Dylan's been running them through some session zeros to see if they're liking it, and everyone's getting really good feedback. So eventually the plan is for that to come to the stream or to the Twitch, but in the meantime they are recording their episodes and is on the YouTube. And oh, hey Sonny, welcome. No, yeah, welcome. And then on Tuesdays we have Horsemen of the Apocalypse, which I've run with 4 of my players there. They're in a time travel campaign. They are in the middle of year 8 out of a 20-year span. And then we have guild games that we have been having on and off. So we're looking for more people to apply for those. Right now there's no restrictions. Eventually it's going to be based on your tier subscription on Twitch, but right now we're just trying to get everybody in and playing. So if you guys want to play with anybody here on the channel, any of our staff, jump on our Discord, go into the guild games and say that you're interested, and we can create a character and get the scheduling lined up and try to get more games going. And then Saturday mornings, for now, we have this world building project. It's a system that we are making from scratch completely. We are using references from other things, but we're wanting to make an entire game, build a campaign, and but we're writing up a player's handbook, a game master's guide, 5 modules, maybe more, or who knows. So that's what we're taking you guys through on this. We might be switching the days because my scheduling has changed. Don't know when it's going to be, but for now it's still going to stay Saturdays. We'll keep you posted. So if you guys are tuned in, and we're going to be watching the chat, so if there's any ideas you guys have, or as we're going through things, if things pop out in your mind, please let us know. Trying to open this up to the community. If you guys can sometimes think of things that we didn't think of, and we'd love to absolutely implement it if it's a good enough idea. So keep the juices flowing, and keep the comments coming. All right. Any announcements that you had, Joe, or are you ready to just jump in for today?
No announcements. I'm sure we'll see more news coming at Dark Heresy, but cool. I'm not running it. I'm just going to show up on Mondays and do my best to make it
sit there and look pretty. Yeah.
Entertaining, yeah.
Eye candy.
That's what they keep me around for. Other than that, yeah, feel free to jump in and chat. We try and keep up with that and see, keep you involved, and absolutely follow up with us and see if you want to join in on Saturdays or whenever it ends up, because the more people, the better.
Sure.
If me and Sean just parrot stuff back and forth, then we just start talking the same.
If you guys are watching this on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe on that side. We're trying to build up our viewer base. We have just been kind of using that as just kind of an archive for all of our regular viewers who miss anything, but we are going to be trying to expand our YouTube, so that'll notify when you go live. But if you're watching this on Twitch, if you're new, follow and click the bell notification to be notified. If you guys want to become subscribers, you get lots of benefits. In the chat, there are mini games that you can play to earn table tokens, and every quarter we reset those, and the top 60 get VIP badges. So becoming a subscriber, you get increased chances for those and extra tickets in the giveaways. But you also get cool emotes for each of the different games that we have on the channel. If you guys want to step up a little bit further and support the channel in another tier, we have awesome merch. We got cups, shirts, hoodies, stickers, and we just recently added in mouse pads. So we got mouse pads and gaming mouse pads, and eventually we're going to be adding more merch to the store based on different shows that are taking off. So, all right, let's jump into it. We still need to figure out the system's working name, so that would be a good thing for us to eventually hash out. But for tonight, we were saying the focus that we wanted to look at is going to be the properties of magic in the system, how that's going to work. Neural implants, that got thrown out last week, and I have not stopped thinking about it. It is a really exciting idea that I was wanting to kick around and see what we can implement. And so we'll touch on that. And then I do want to start dipping into the starships. No clue what we're going to do. As we said from the very beginning, yes, we are trying to make our own system, but not everything needs to be made from scratch. There's a lot of really good tabletop systems out there. So we're going to be exploring some systems out there that already have starship mechanics and use those for kind of a foundation, just like a lot of the other stuff that we're doing. So some things will be copy and paste for now. The plan is eventually to go through all the stuff that we're referencing for other materials and completely overhaul it and make it our own. But we got to start somewhere. So we want to look at that. So, which of the three do you want to start with, Joe?
Ooh, since we've got it pulled up, let's kind of talk about starship mechanics. Is that just stuck in my head since we were talking about it before we got started?
Starships?
Yeah, let's
Awesome.
talk about space.
All right, so we did talk about how we liked the idea of space being not like our space, having a fantasy kind of space, one that was breathable, like where you don't just like freeze to death if you're not inside of a suit. I think that'll open up a lot of exciting moments for players, like say their ship gets blown up or they want to try to sneak aboard another one. They could just push themselves off the side of the ship. This opens up a can of worms, though. Either side does. So I figure before we get to starships, we can maybe talk about that. We also talked about the crystals from Zed being used to charge the ship. I've been doing some brainstorming about different types of crystals or different ways to utilize those crystals instead of just one use, like multiple uses that they could have. Is this breathable space just inertly how it is, or is it only when you're inside of this shield bubble of the ships that's what makes it breathable? So we can kind of dive into that, and then I think that will kind of set the tone for how the rest of the starship things are going to go.
Works for me. Sounds like a good starting point.
Okay. So pros and cons of how space should be. Keeping it lethal does have some benefits. One, it's more scientific, more realistic, so it appeases to the sci-fi side. It'll also keep people inside of ships, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
it'll kind of have some mechanical control, which would be kind of nice for GMs, I think. So that is a benefit. Another benefit is looking at going into planets, like descending through the atmosphere. It would make sense to have that, like burning up, like a person couldn't, like you have to have an appropriate starship to enter an atmosphere. So that would be kind of cool. Like, we could come up with base stats of like the properties of the atmosphere for each planet. Say Shiva has this stat block that the GM could pull up, and ship entering or different levels of orbit, or if they go to descend on the planet, they roll off this table for burning up the ship, and then so base ships would have their own stats of whether or not they could survive. Obviously it wouldn't have to be a flat amount, it could be a roll, so maybe they could survive when they shouldn't, or they might not when they should. So there's that kind of idea. If we go with the breathable space, it would open up a lot of really fun moments. It is gonna open up like the space wells thing, the idea that we had, or like space creatures, so it's not just ship on ship. There might be some huge galactic monsters that are floating around in space, so that would be kind of cool to have that aspect. Could open up some piracy things. Could also talk about the enemies that I started kicking around some ideas for possible enemies. So that could open up some extra things that they could do. Like some pirates could jump from ship to ship, kind of feeding off of the naval warfare pirates, where they pull up, they throw grappling hooks, or they swing from the thing. You know, like having that in a space game is really cool. And then maybe they could have like some hole penetrating drill if they come and land, and you know, to try to burrow a hole. And so
it does set a very cool scene. The idea on the inside, just hearing just thud, just these magnetic grappling hooks, and then just drill, baby, drill. Now we've got X amount of time before they can penetrate this hole. So what are we gonna do? My brain screams lethal space, but that's because my brain says it has to make sense. So all we have to do is justify breathable space, and that's as simple as it is. My brain knows one thing and so wants it. That doesn't mean breathable space is a bad idea, because I do like all the stuff it opens up. So in my head, I want to justify it, but it's a make-believe land. We don't necessarily need to, but if we can come with some pseudoscience that might appeal to the people who have a Joe brain, where they want an answer to why.
That's fair.
One thing was just occurring to me, and I don't know if we would want to do it, because then it opens up a weird mix of some can, some can't. But if it's tied to elemental affinity, like if you have elemental forces kind of entwined within you, you can kind of survive that harshness of space. Whereas that elemental energy is kind of low key, just keeping, like, cycling the oxygen in your blood for you. Maybe there's a time frame to that. Maybe it's indefinite. But then it would just be the idea that if there are creatures in space, they would have to be tied to have an elemental affinity as well if we tied it to that. So that limits us in some other areas if we use that. Actually.
Sure.
It was just something that came up as I was thinking. Just reading chat there, the idea of a species, a spacefaring species that excretes oxygen, referring to the space whales. So the idea that there's just a thin oxygen, so it's survivable. It's interesting, depending on how permeating such a species would be, or if there's more than one. But it's an interesting concept. The same idea of, like, plants breathing.
Because we could go the route of there's no oxygen, but it also doesn't kill you as well. So it'd be kind of a hybrid of the two, where, say, if you had a breathing apparatus hooked up to you, then you could then venture. That way, you wouldn't have to be tied to your elemental affinity, so we could have other NPCs or other, you know what I mean. If there are particular monster, we could just come up with a backstory, a feature that creature has of how it is able to either not have to breathe, or it has its way to breathe in space, like some space gills or something. That might be best of both worlds kind of a thing, where, like, you could still have the pirate thing or whatever we're talking about, but you got to hold your breath, or just have it be part of their gear. Having a space suit on, you can then breathe oxygen, but you could essentially hold your breath. Like, say you're gonna be docking on something, but there's something happening where you can't get through, but there's a opening. You can still jump through space, from the one shield bubble to the other, just holding your breath or something like that.
Yeah. And the idea of the crystals generating, being powerful enough to kind of generate an atmosphere around your ship would make ship-to-ship jump possible as well. And it's up to us to decide how high-tech things are. So if we kind of say that, yes, as soon as people got into space, they figured out spacesuits easy. It's incorporated into your equipment. If you get blasted into space, you're going to have enough oxygen to survive for long enough that it's not going to be super relevant. Just
like sailors would carry life jackets everywhere, or part of their suit could become a flotation device.
Kind of thing.
They could just, part of whatever they wear has a breathing tube or something, just in case something happened.
And depending on how big we make a spaceship, I'm kind of picturing, I haven't really sat down to visualize the idea of a portable atmosphere going with the ship, but I like the idea, whether we justify that you can only breathe within a certain radius of a ship or not. But I'm just picturing a space that just has clouds around it, and like its own localized weather in space because it's just got its
Oh,
own packet of atmosphere around it. So it's just this interesting idea of this a ship moving within its own rainstorm
sure.
or something like that, which
I.
it could also help
Mm-hmm.
justify like agriculture on a large enough ship to provide for people on longer
Mm-hmm.
space journeys. So I like the idea of keeping that, whether we say that's the be all end all of if you're too far away from a ship that has atmosphere, then it's space again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think if we lean as close as we can or completely into the idea of breathable space, it adds an element of sci-fi fantasy that'll let
Sure.
that's one less barrier.
Well, having breathable space, you could have, for instance, starships that are like Corvette type, but that are like convertible, right? It's not necessarily, you're just open out in space and just shooting over the head. You know what I mean? So it could open up a lot of really cool things, but is that also too ridiculous?
It's a little ridiculous, but it's also really fun.
I agree.
Um, I have a very limited knowledge of stars and planets and space and science, but in theory, uh, with or in fact, if I'm right, any kind of revolving set of things in space has to be revolving around something. So if it's a strong enough force, I don't know if we've decided that they're in one solar system, one galaxy, if they're all kind of got how they're interconnected, but say they're all orbiting a central point. If that thing is strong enough to also hold like trace atmosphere, essentially they would have a shared atmosphere. It would be thin. You would probably need to get into a full atmosphere at some point,
Mm-hmm.
but it would be like being at high altitude where it's not
Mm.
going to kill you. Um, within stronger atmosphere gets localized to planets. So the idea that there's just like this disk of elements, gases, oxygen
Mm-hmm.
orbiting, and all these planets are kind of within this disk, whether they're
Yeah.
in localized groups orbiting together or if they're all orbiting as one big group, however we're doing that. Um, but that's my basic level of understanding of science way of saying,
Sure.
sure.
Well, I think us not trying to burden ourselves with realism will be doing ourselves a favor. Not trying to come with scientific explanations or, like plausible things that could be in a foreseeable, realistic future. I think just, saying fuck that and just what is fun and what works for us. And we can just explain it away with magic, or that's just how it is.
Sure.
Because this is fantasy. It is sci-fi, but
Absolutely.
it is fantasy. I mean, like people being able to do meteor swarm spell. There's no fucking way you could do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In a Star Wars or a Star Trek-y type game, uh, that's impossible. You know what I mean? So I kind of like keeping that fantasy vein.
Sure. I don't know if we've got like a physical representation of the elements anywhere or had planned for it, but the idea that some people have an affinity for elements because trace elemental magic is within this universe. I mean, space is where they're most likely to commingle. So the idea that the elemental energies that commingle as they cross each other, reaching out to the planets they're most closely tied to, just kind of creates this nebulous of low key elemental energy, affinity, magic, whatever word we want to use,
I
that
had
kind of sustains life.
I had a thought since you're talking about elemental affinities and what they could mean. We do have one that's air. I had the thought of maybe air affinity people can breathe in space.
Oh,
So it would be a niche thing, but a benefit. We'd have to have equally balanced benefits for each of the other elements to give you, you know, something comparable to that.
if we equated the breathable space so that it's not limiting non-air elemental people to have let them kind of enjoy that same if they want to be space pirates feel, if we're using that as our example of how you would use breathable space, um, it could be rather than like these guys can breathe in space, these guys can't. It could be on the level of if you guys are more comfortable with it, you're gonna have like I don't know if we're gonna assign a mechanical like detriment saying okay this is effectively at high altitude actions cost more action points because you're breathing harder or something.
Mm-hmm.
Then the air elementals would say no you can do this normally, something where it's not
Mm.
a can and can't but like an edge.
Mm-hmm. Simply going with the you just can't go in space. That would simplify a lot of things. And nobody would ever question it. You know,
That's true.
nobody would be that nobody would ever second guess it. You know, I mean, that would just be a sensible thing, and people would play assuming that. I think us, if we said it is livable, that's gonna open it up to kind of like asking people to do it. So I think it would add a lot of really cool things, having people being able to be out in space. But I think it's going to cause a lot of, which is fine, you know, but a lot of things we're going to have to look at. Should we assume moving forward it's one way or the other and build around that, or try to kind of stay in a gray zone where come up with ideas that could work in either for now?
I don't think we necessarily want to cement ourselves into one or the other. Kind of as we discuss things that are going to involve space, we can say we can come at it like we haven't nailed down yet if we're going to do realistic space or this fantasy livable space. How would these impact those? And as we get to a case by case decision, we're going to see more sharply defined pros and cons, I think.
Sure.
So we might say, okay, we've talked about space a dozen times, and time again, we keep coming back to that situation would really benefit from letting
Sure.
players have that creativity of the livable space, or the opposite, and go, okay, every time we talk about making that livable space, when we apply it to an actual scenario, there's too many questions, it's complicated, um, and it would streamline everything to go with realistic space. So I think as we come up with the ideas of what we're going to do with space,
Mm-hmm.
we'll get a clearer idea of exactly what we want.
Sunny said maybe Zed shards imbued with air element creates bubbles of breathable space. Interesting idea, and gave me another thought too. We were talking about having different uses for the crystals. Maybe the shield part of it could be earth element. The air could create a the air, you know, fire could have another, you know, like maybe that's an idea we could kick around too. So you couldn't have more than one up. So, for instance, the pirates that are trying to board a ship and they're sending the people over with the magnet grapple hook, they would have to change their shield to then be the air orientation. So they wouldn't have a normal deflector shield.
Okay.
The aura would now be the air. That's kind of cool where you have the option and it could be for everyone. And then we could come up with a lightning, water, and a fire versions of those. Maybe like the water one starts repairing the hull of the ship.
Yeah, like a nanite flood. The
Yeah.
first way I
And
would
then the
phrase
fire
it. However
could
we
be
do.
some kind of plasma discharge. I don't know, but like something where like smaller fighters that are in this vicinity will just be passively taking damage. It's kind of like a layer action activation. You know, like you could switch it over for different passives.
Yeah, the idea. I mean, just I like that. I don't know if it would just be an aura, but my first thought was like, yeah, something's driving these things. And in my head, because I have limited knowledge, it's a radioactive giant engine. And if they just vent it, now there's
Yeah.
radiation damaging your little ships. There's a good, and or we just say it's fire, like whatever. But I like the concept,
Yeah.
however we define it. And the same idea with lightning, the idea that it's just
You could put out a
like
buffing
opening.
aura for all the little star shit, the TIE fighters that leave the
Yeah, you've
carrier.
got your fighter squadron, and then you activate this lightning aura, and then just these tendrils of energy latch on to all of them, and now they can move faster. Um, Maybe they get an extra action economy point. However
Sure.
you make
Dude,
it
that's
mechanically.
cool.
But I'm just picturing like this, like a jellyfish almost. All these just strings zipping around, tying to. So just visually, I'm enjoying it already.
Yeah, that's
But
super cool.
or the vice versa. You could like drain power. You could latch on to if you don't have
To
fighters of your
siphon
own
energy or something. Yeah.
So then maybe you're kind of replenishing your own battery supply by draining them, and then it's kind of that same buff debuff mentality.
Okay.
So lightning has a lot of flexibility in what you could do depending on how you want to define buff debuff. But I like the idea of there being like facets to the Zed shards.
Agreed. And then that could full circle bring it back to the neural implant idea that we're talking about, where if that's the interface one does with the ship, where they use their own affinities, someone in, say, like a dogfighter, smaller ship, they only get the Z aura bubble options that is their affinity. So say the Earth ones are the shields or whatever we end up going with, there are those who would innately be better at certain things with starships. So that could kind of tie back to the planets. When we start looking at what is their spaceship focus, what is their strengths, what kind of ships do they have, what do they do, if we kind of established what those Zed crystals could do, people of the planet would only have two options. So that would kind of give us an idea of what their ships would be good at. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, like the Sakaar, for instance, they had a really huge fleet that we had talked about, that we already established, water and fire. So, we could kind of think about what those affinities would make. Maybe why they had so much firepower was because of the fire. Or maybe what made them so strong was they were like the Borg, where their ships could kind of just repair themselves constantly. Nobody could ever do any amount of damage. Like, their hull was so thick, like you'd be blasting and blasting and it would be repairing itself, so it's completely futile.
I like what that opens up for the idea of large scale. I don't know who amongst these planets is going to get into war with each other, but it's possible. In any case, I like the idea of what that means for like fighter squadrons.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have a fire squad, like literally a firing squad. So you would have some fire elemental affinity pilots for strike teams.
Mm-hmm.
And you would organize these people. So you might have like individual water pilots who kind of fly between squadrons repairing ships.
Oh, that's so dope.
You might have like flanking squadrons of earth elementals to kind of make a shield wall that just lifts up right before the firing squad does the dirty business. You might have one central lightning pilot who's just hitting whoever needs juice.
Sure. Dude, so that's super cool.
It opens up some cool ideas of how you organize.
Yeah, and that would explain why the guilds work together. Because I've been kind of thinking about what are the guilds doing? Who's the protagonist? Who's the antagonist? We haven't really gotten to that stuff, so I've been kicking around ideas. Obviously, we want to have it be open to where there can be guild-on-guild conflict,
sure.
Because that would be super fun. But I do think that there should be a baseline that we start with. They are allies, and there are other things that they are working against. Now, there can be that... what did we call them? The mystics thing that are maybe manipulating the guilds, or they have something and that could come into fruition in the story, or not. I really like the idea of having this be modular in the modules, where we just have things set up, lots of things, like a bunch of tools and a bunch of... Here's the sandbox parameters, here's all the sand, here's a ton of different cool tools that you can use as a GM, and you can make any kind of game you want. And here's a ton of lore and options and mechanics. But yeah, that's super cool. I think that maybe us looking at the enemies idea that I've thought of, assuming that um, the guilds are all allies for now, because they could have their own conflicts. Do you want to run through those real quick?
Yeah, I'm looking at. I'm getting it pulled up right now, and I think as we delve into kind of the origins of guilds and their histories,
Mm-hmm.
whether or not we keep a system so like cut and dry, I'm just thinking of like the, you know, high school grade knowledge of checks and balances and U.S.
Mm-hmm.
democracy that all of us here learn. I don't want to say everyone because hopefully we've got anybody can come listen. But anyway, so whether we say there are installed checks and balances, the legislative guild keeps the military guild in check with this power,
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth. If we come up with some rudimentary basic ideas of how they balance one another, we can kind of work backwards and say, okay, how did that grow? What conflicts
Sure.
saw the rise of this power checking on this power, and see how it became mutually beneficial? Because I would assume it's kind of, we work together because it makes,
It's a symbiosis, yeah.
yeah, it's, I work with you because it makes me stronger, not because it makes us stronger. I'm picturing, which doesn't necessarily have to be how the guilds are. Maybe they, but I'm assuming they each have some agendas that they're working on,
Sure.
irrespective.
Mm-hmm.
So just as we kind of delve into that history, that's my thought process and how we'll get it done. We'll approach that in more detail as we work on that particular history. But yeah,
I do like that. That fits in the idea I had of there's 5 guilds that connect in some ways. Not it's one guild that has 5 extensions of itself.
Mm.
Yeah, I think I work with you because it helps me idea. Them all having that is a good idea, I think.
Yeah. And some of them have some pretty obvious how they're useful to everyone. The transport guild is going to be pretty universally useful to moving military troops and trade goods.
Yeah, they have the carriers and the large scale ships to be able to throw tons of people. Yeah.
So we'll definitely find reasons why they're useful to one another as we get into it, and then find the concrete reason we put up with them because they provide this, and then kind of flesh it out into actual reasons. But anyway, I'm getting distracted from the
No, it's good. This is all things we got to talk about anyway, and who knows, it might spur someone in the chat to say something cool too. So I was trying to think of different categories of bad guys. Obviously, we want to come up with monsters and stuff too, but I had the idea of Holy Crusaders, which would be the religious fanatics, the jihads, or the whatever, like the super fanatical ones. And then Insurrection, I was thinking could be defects from guilds. So potentially there could be,
especially as we're talking about neural links, because we tossed around the idea later on, finding out it's not such a good thing.
Right.
So if we keep that idea, or even if it's just these people who are like, I don't like that they're in my brain, man, which maybe they've got some like legit psychosis, or maybe they're just onto the real deal. And if you can make someone walk that line as a character just in a TV show, is this dude crazy, or is he the only guy seeing the truth?
Sure.
He's a very cool character to introduce to people. But I'm already very on board with the Insurrection. I got
very
excited just hearing that.
Cool. Yeah, so I was thinking splits. I set one up for the Aquas Guild and the Fulgus Guild. That doesn't mean there couldn't be one for each, but I was just starting somewhere. So we'll get into those. But a commonality, I was thinking for the logos, for the guild. I like the idea of having like banner flags, insignia, and have that be a very prevalent thing in the game, where like ships will be branded with them, people's uniform, they're, so you could see what someone's alliances are from right away. So the insurrections will have a chevron thing behind them, and they're the defactors from the guilds. So obviously the guilds would especially hate these guys because they're traitors. So that would add some things. So we'll come back to that. And then mercs. So mercenaries, those could be the spice runners, the smugglers, the people working beyond the laws of the guilds. So it could be good people, it could be bad people, it could be, but they're all pretty much unlawful, essentially. So it could be people, maybe there's an orphanage or something of all these abandoned orphans, and some trade deal forbids anybody from leaving, but they're gonna die. So there could be some good mercs who, no, we gotta save these kids, and they'll break the laws and smuggle them out, or sex trafficking. Like there could be lots of other bad things too. But anyway, so the mercs will just work outside the law. So those will definitely be a perspective, whether they're good or bad. And then of course we got pirates, and I came up with 3 sects of them. But I want to start with the Holy Crusaders, which I can bring it down to here. Alright, so the name I thought of them was Quatorium and Quad 4. So the idea I had for them is religious fanatics that feel that they have a spiritual calling to purge the universe of those against their four-faced God. I like the idea of it's like omnipresent, like it's facing all of it, kind of like the tribunal in Marvel. Their faith dictates that all creation was made for the children of this God, and they are the only thing with souls. All unbelievers are infidels, and their lives have no meaning. They roam the star system in a large capital ship with a single benefactor who has funded their cause. They are known for their lack of mercy and are extremists. They avoid the guilds at all costs, although they would never admit it. They keep the facade up that they have a divine calling to do what their god wills them, but the guild's sheer numbers across the star system could easily overtake them. They would be a recurring presence in the modules and a problematic encounter that shows up at the worst of times for an adventuring party. They are a GM mechanic to turn hard times into very difficult times. Several pre-made encounters will be made that are universally usable in most situations that could be copied and pasted wherever the GM needs them to be. The Force-Face God is a 4-in-1 entity whose faces represents different aspects of their faith. These 4 things are the pillars for everything they stand for and mark the steps believers go through their divine order. The first face is faith. The first step in the Quatorium is confession of their deity being the one true God, and believers are infidels. Becoming a believer brings you into a divine family, set apart from all other creation, elite members called to do whatever they want to the rest of creation. I think this would be a really fun aspect if atheism is long been an accepted thing. There is no God, it's all science. That's where we're naturally progressing as scientific things grow, but still having this extreme faith sect would be kind of a really cool thing, to where some people could either have sympathy for them or think of them as more primitive life form. Not life forms, because it's not a race, it's just a belief system. But they're ignorant. Science has proven that this is false. And then the second phase is prayer. The second step in observing the mandatory times of prayer 4 times a day, no matter what the circumstance. There's a time of day for each of the 4 faces, and believers are required to observe that face in prayer or be cast from the Quatorium. So I like the idea of pulling from different religious things. Some of it has been Islam, but they always bow to a certain direction towards Mecca. But I kind of like the idea of, with this one, because it's 4 faces, there's universal nautical northeast southwest for space, right? Whatever we set that up. And since there's 4 faces, these 4 different times of day, they pray to that direction. And they have to... all this stuff is removable. These are just the ideas I came up with. No matter what they're doing at that time, they have to stop and observe in prayer. So this could be really interesting for a PC or an NPC, to where it doesn't matter what's going on. They could be in the middle of combat. They could be in the middle of diplomatic negotiations. They could be in the middle of an insurrection. Whatever. They have to stop. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out thing, but they have to do that. So that'd be kind of interesting. And then them being bad guys, that could, once the players learn about that, those are critical moments where they're vulnerable. Does that make sense? So this is also a mechanical way to help the players. They have a blatant flaw. The third phase is service. The third step in giving your life to serving the Quatorium to further the outreach and committing to a lifelong pledge of unquestionable obedience to the faith. This grants you the rank of zealot, and serving in this capacity proves your faithfulness, eventually leading to the rank of arbiter. So, once you've done enough, zealots would be the people who have positions, the officers essentially, within their sect. And I was thinking having it be set up where their faith system is based on brainwashing. Like, you just completely... There cannot be any doubt. And they just indoctrinate that. The further you get into it, there is no other thing. It's just Quatorium. Just, you live and breathe that. And then they want to mold you into a unquestioning servant. So people who are in this is what would make them so formidable, is that they will die for their cause, like, unquestionably. There's no fear, no questioning. And if they think that they have divine rule, they'll have a very elitist thing. Well, they'll do whatever they want, but then they will also have no remorse, because anybody who's not of the Quatorium, they think, don't even have souls. So you're just kicking over an ant pile. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not like you're killing another important... Creatures don't have value, is essentially what I'm saying. So they're going to be they would almost come across as evil because of their lack of respect for life. That universal thing that all humanoids... Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I got you.
And then continuing on serving as a zealot, they could eventually move into an arbiter position, and which is the fourth face of this god, justice. Arbiters have spent many years as fanatics within the faith and have indoctrinated the scripts to memory and understand their god's merciless view of justice, and enact extreme demonstrations of faith and lead the charge of their evangelism. So they would be kind of like, once they've blindly followed and proven themselves, they can move up to actually interpreting for their god. And it could definitely be for their own agendas. You know, who knows? Because a zealot can't possibly hear from the Quatorium god. You know what I mean? Like, that's the rules of arbiters. And then there could be a grand arbiter or whatever, whoever's this main benefactor who started this whole cult. So I was thinking that it'd be really cool is that instead of having a planet, they have maybe possibly the biggest ship in the game. Whatever the biggest capital ship scale that we go to is these guys, and it's nothing the guilds even have. They have quantity, and you know, up to a certain tier, but whatever tier 5 or whatever the top tier is, that would be the Quatorium ship. And then they have, obviously, that would be kind of like a city, you know, a flying city. And then they could have ships that go out and do incursions and stuff like that. But this being a mobile, massive fortress, the guilds never know exactly where they are. And it being that big, having extensions of the guilds would get mowed down by this. If the guild, like, full-on war with the, like, we're sending everything we've got, it's only one ship. They would get destroyed. You know, but they just... The Quatorium just operates with secrecy and gathering intel. They always know where to not be, stuff like that. So what do you think?
I like religious sects in a game a lot. I will listen to podcasts about kind of this one that does series on things, various different cults, serial killers, things, kind of examining kind of the psychological aspect and how things start. And you can take this kind of thing in a lot of different ways that I very much like for storytelling purposes. So whether there's some cabal up top that is running all this for their own reasons, the whole thing is shit, they're feeding it to people, and the people on bottom are generally trying to do some good. Maybe they all believe in it wholeheartedly from the beginning, and they're just trying to spread the word.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the whole thing's if everyone's involved in a front for some other thing. So you can do a lot with a cult because a lot of them start with well-meaning
Right.
people and
Uh-huh.
go very radically different directions. But however this group ends up, whatever else, I fundamentally just am all on board with the theme of the four-faced god,
Mm-hmm.
because we're hitting it kind of hard when we talk about it here, because it's kind of started with the five elements and it's kind of been a theme and a springboard for us. And not everything's ended up, we've ended up with whatever 7 traits we talked about,
Sure.
5. So not everything's going to have 5, but 5's a prevalent number.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we're going to spoon feed in the book, hey, 5 is a holy number and 5,
Sure.
5, 5. But it will come up. People
Sure.
will subconsciously at least see 5 things here, 5 things there. So for there to be this 4-faceted thing,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be different. Whether or not you're conscious of it, that's different. And so it's going to stick out on some level.
Sure.
So if it's a square peg in a round hole, so whether you decide that the peg should be rounded off to fit the hole, or if someone needs to add corners to the hole because the peg is right, you're going to see the difference.
And if we had a lack of pantheon in the game, that this is the only god, it's like we could address that. We could think of a different thing. But I really like the idea of taking that part out of fantasy of, no, it's just there is no faith, it's gone. But then there are these that do. So this would make recruiting a very interesting thing. Some people from all planets in the system would seek these people out if they have any kind of theism inside of them. If they think that they look at all this beauty and wonder, no, there's no way this is an accident, it had to be created. There's only one faith, there's only one theism. Now we could have some polytheism, we could have different, whatever, we could address that issue too. But I like this idea of that's why they are so strong, is religion is forgot about, but it's resurfaced from their main benefactor, the Grand Arbiter. Whether it's a real faith or it's made up or whatever, whether they have magical powers from this god because it's real or not, that's indifferent. But I like the idea of they are going on this holy crusade of pretty much presenting their faith. Believe it? No? Okay, then we're just decimating everyone. Like, they'll just burn everything to the ground, napalm the planet, that kind of thought. Obviously they couldn't destroy a whole planet, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I do like, whether we call it complete atheism and accepting this group, or if we don't even address it and say, hey, there's no pantheon that delivers power to clerics, there's just polyglot. People in different regions have made religion throughout time. It's here. Use it if you want to. Name it what you like. There's no established...
I like that. Okay.
Except these guys. They are the televangelist taken to the extreme.
Sure.
So they're the only religion that, whether they're the only religion or the only religion that's been able to spread its message and convince people on a scale of this magnitude.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you'll see, I'm from Sakar. There are these ideologies and these ideas of faith, and okay, well, we've never heard of that here on Solaris 8, and sure, if that works for you, these are some of the ideas that float around in these people. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a set in stone.
Sure.
Though I don't dislike the idea of the idea that it's such a science-heavy thing, which honestly, if you do it that way, then it leaves you open to flip the script and say science killed God and that's a bad thing. So that leaves you, which you could still do even if you had like polyglot, everyone's got their own ideas. But yeah, either way, I like the idea of having this one mega church with this level of kind of tenacity and kind of indoctrination to the point where they bring their most fervent believers into one central place to make sure they
Sure.
stay that way.
And I really like the idea of having like a table of 20 things that we pre-make the Quatorium encounters. You know, so say you're around area, here's 4. You know, like obviously a GM could make up whatever. We would encourage that. You know, you could use this as a guide or shift things, or whatever. But having it to where they don't even necessarily, they could plan a Quatorium encounter like ahead of time, be the next story plot for their game, or it could just be something that they're aware of and is ready at any time, to where if the players are doing something they need to rein them in, or they just feel like sometimes players need an ass whipping. You know what I mean? Like if they're going off and doing something, you need to rein them back in. It's part of the game master's job to do that. You know what I mean? So, and you also need to have moments of them like genuine fear. You know what I mean? So I think this would be a really good way to do that. So you can always come back to them. But yeah, Quatorium I thought was a really fun idea. Insurrection. All right, insurrection lore. Yeah, I talked about it was defecting from the guilds. Aquas and Fulgus Guild is the ones I thought of first. So the first one, this is the emblem I thought of. I was wanting them to be kind of close to the guild symbol. Obviously, the people in it would have a water affinity. In other words, the octopus. You know, this one's kind of close. We don't have to use this one specifically, but that's what I was thinking. Was if they were part of the guild and then defected, they would probably still have that magic initiate side, and this could make them a different type of enemy. So they're casters. They have knowledge of the guild. They know how they operate. They know their standard operating procedures. So they could know ways of taking advantage of the guilds because they're a part of it. And they had some reason, whether it be political, personal, religion, moral, whatever reasons, and they could all have their own. Could be about money, power. They defected. And if we tied in the neural implants thing, which we can talk about as well, if that being a requirement for becoming in the guild, the guilds are acquiring all of these affinities all around, convincing them to become part of the guild, sending them through base training and advanced training for their classes. They give them these neural implants, and you now belong to the guild. Part of joining the insurrection would be taking that implant out. So that would be kind of a defining thing. So I think this would be a really good way of giving an opposing worldview to the PCs. And they, for instance, they could then join the insurrection and then be opposing the guilds. Or they could stay with the guilds and the insurrections would be bad guys. You know what I mean? So it kind of harkens back to that modular type system where we just have so many ways to play and just leave it up to the GM of what his game wants to be, or he just be open to and just accommodate the game to whatever the players end up doing. And so like for instance with Hoda, this is going to be like a 5-6 year campaign, huge, right? But there's a certain way it's set up where I can't accommodate them as much as I'd like to because of how we've set it up. There's a certain way it needs to go for the whole thing to make sense big picture. I would really love a game where it was so sandboxy, so set up to where they could literally do anything they want, and the game accommodates that. So, instructions would be cool. Thoughts on those? So
I think they're necessary. Whatever we kind of boil their actual ideology down to, however angry they are at the guilds, any group especially one with power and authority, is going to have somebody who disagrees with them. So that's going to happen regardless. It's just kind of the natural consequence of having an opinion is someone's going to have a differing one.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of people from within who kind of had the opinion or fell out, or I saw someone brought up in chat the idea that some people are kind of forcibly recruited, and that could come in a lot of different ways. Like I'm picturing somebody economic means. You find a gifted kid in a poor family. Well, mom and dad, how much money is it going to take? Leaning on people in different ways could lead to all sorts of different resentment. So I think it's the natural reaction to any authority structure is that someone wants to oppose it. For something this large scale, it makes sense for the opposition to be large scale.
Sure.
Because a lot of the times when you see them, if you disagree with your boss, you're not like forming a militia against him on the micro, but on the macro, I mean, we've got all sorts of world governments that disagree, and one of the favorite ways of disagreeing throughout history is war.
Right.
It happens on the largest scale. So I think it makes sense and it's required, and it's a very cool way to have a mirror held up to the PC.
Mm-hmm.
So this could be you. So here you are. Here's your viewpoint. How does looking into this kind of twisted funhouse mirror feel? How are you trying to put yourself in their shoes? Are you going blindly? No, the guild is correct. This is what I know. This is what's true, and I have to oppose them. Or are you somewhere in? Are you kind of unsure? Is it kind of pulling you in different ways? You don't know. So it's a lot of good way to kind of provide viewpoints outside of the kind of guild structure that is the game. You sign up into this system by saying, "Yep, I'm going to join the guild," but it's a way of providing flexibility. It's like just as an example from 5e, the Oath of Vengeance Paladin. You wanted to play the Paladin class, but you didn't want to play the religious nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's find a way to give you what you came here for, which is this game, without necessarily having to do it with the structure,
the standard way,
story setting. Exactly.
Right.
And whatever side you choose, you're going to see elements of both, and that's going to be an interplay that's going to lead to some very cool stuff.
Sure. And I was also thinking from the module side, the Firebook, Airbook, whatever, if each of them had their own insurrection foe to deal with, that could be part of that book's storyline. So, we're kind of building a little bit for each of those books. And then, but like how we're going to run all of them at the same time, plus our own homebrew version of the modules that we make. So that would open it up for all of them being a presence, but we could also have times that focuses on the Fire Guild, and when that happens, the insurrection of that guild could be a problem. You could deal with those storyline things. Alright, so we got some people in chat. Welcome, guys. Yeah, we're just running through everything. Very Crusader era, Christianity-esque history, student approval gained. Yeah, I like the idea of like the Catholicism going through against the paganism. Yeah, I love that idea. I love it's really
I'm still very
cool.
much digging the Quatorium. Anything that makes me go, okay, but why and how? Just so many questions about their motivations and background. That's already a good premise.
Awesome. And then for the mercs, I came up with the idea of Shadow Palm. That could be more than one merc, because we don't have to use this one. I didn't really develop anything, but I was just thinking that'd be kind of cool maybe as like in D&D with the Thieves' Cant and the secret language and the markings, just seeing a black palm on something could be an indication of a merc, people could know this is a merc thing.
And mercs, again, it's the idea of people who disagree with you, the people that work outside your knowledge kind of thing is also something that's going to happen. And I like mercs because they're going to be flexible enough to kind of suit anything. Like you mentioned, some might be doing good things, some might be doing bad. So you might have some people who are just sick of the mandated guild prices, and look, we can do this cheaper, we can do this better, and they're gonna just outside of the established guild kind of transactions and commerce have set up their own thing, which is going to come with its own risk. The guild probably doesn't approve of that, and the guilds are pretty well established in as kind of the governing bodies of everything. But then you're also going to have mercs, the idea of hiring a thieves guild or an assassin to do something completely illegal.
Right.
So a mercenary, being a hired gun, lets you go anywhere from, I'm going to blank on the group. I don't think it's the Black Hand. It's from DC Comics. Ra's al Ghul runs it. And if you watch this now or on YouTube and yell at me later, I get it. League of Assassins. There we go. So that kind of thing, though they're not necessarily for hire, but they have their own agendas. They're willing to get their hands dirty. To the A Team, where we're here to help. So
they could have a moral cause, but they could also just follow a coin.
And just kind of looking at these, honestly, every time you spin up these cool logos, I'm just like, this is just a thing that's
why I love them, because that in itself inspires so many thoughts.
What I got the amount of work that goes into a clandestine or kind of shadow organization to try and figure out what strings they're pulling, and then try and figure out what effects those strings have. But the more I'm looking at these cool logos, the more I'm thinking about Mass Effect with the Elusive Man. Cerberus is their organization, and they have a logo. But for the introductory games in that series, people talk about that organization like it's a myth. So the idea that there might be unmarked ships flying about in this, no, we all have banners. So there's somebody trying to be invisible. I don't know if that's something we want to put in, because like I said, that means we have to try and be like, okay, we've got this guy as a spider in the middle of his web. What is he trying to accomplish? Where does that web reach?
Sure.
And that's a whole bunch of work. But it's just something that came to me while looking at all this cool stuff. But yeah, and like I said, I like mercs because they're varied, because I'm immediately thinking, like you said, Spice Runners, the orcs kind of pump out bounty
I think
hunters.
there'd be a lot of orcs in the Shadow Palm.
And the idea of minotaurs that do leave the planet might be a prime kind of, we're going to fit into a mercenary party rather than a guild.
Maybe some of the dark elves that lead Othea. They could maybe be in there, or they would be. I think a lot of them would be pirates, though, too.
And yeah, and that's going to be the difference. Like, and I mean, it's a fine line, but it's the idea of kind of raging against the machine, and whether that's for good or for ill, and then for hire, and then as we're getting into the pirates, who also have cool logos, the idea of taking for yourself. So it's just Thieves Guild gone naval, but in space,
right?
Which is fun to do. I'm still very much into the idea of just these guys launching off of ships.
Yeah, dude, that's such a cool idea. Super down. All right, 2 of the pirates I purposely didn't touch at all, because I don't want to do all, like I know some of the fun is for, you and some of the other devs. So, so Sabretooth I thought would be cool. And again, having some kind of insignia commonality, whether it be color schemes or the background images. So for the pirates, I was thinking that double streak across the back. And it doesn't even have to be something we talk about, but having certain things like that the players will kind of pick up on is like an alliance with each other. You know what I mean? Like, pirates are pirates, but they do piratey shit to each other. But if you fuck with one ship, they're both going to turn, and then they go back to fighting themselves. You know what I'm saying? So like any similarities just for the emblems. But Vulture and Sabretooth left blank. But so if you have any idea, feel free to do some stuff on that. But I took one of them called the Unnamed. The most fearsome pirates in the star system. They have no name, and even if they did, the word would be forbidden. These unnamed are responsible for any superstitious acts and mysterious occurrences that may think and many think that their crew is comprised of ghosts, banshees, living dead, or even devils. The rumors of their presence causes most to turn around, and even the bravest know to avoid them. Their reputation has gone far beyond folklore to solidify them into the worst nightmares of space travelers. It is a major taboo to even speak of them. Superstitions cause people to think that speaking of the unnamed causes them to manifest. Because of this, most people only talk about them in secret, and because of this, the variance in the stories of the unnamed vary widely across the system. They aren't just folklore; they are actual pirates, but they are nowhere what their reputation gives them credit of. They have a couple mystics at the center of the group who use power telepathy to implant fearful thoughts and false memories into those they let survive and cause them to frantically spread rumors of things that they saw the unnamed do, which they believe to be true since their memories were altered. Now, the unnamed banner also strikes so much fear to space travelers that they can usually just make an appearance or announce their appearance into a sector, and by the time they get there, most have deserted the area, and they can just pick through what's left behind. What do you think?
I very much like the idea of a space boogeyman.
Mm-hmm.
It's just given me flashbacks to a very short-lived Star Wars campaign I played of the new system, but they had an old exploding D6. Found a race that couldn't lie; they just were incapable of it. So I turned that into a pirate, and there was like a lizard-type alien with him, and so they developed a reputation that my character would kind of describe to people what was going to happen when this animalistic lizard monster was allowed to be let loose if things did not comply. And when the reputation spread that that's the gospel truth, it was just that kind of fear aspect. Now, this is a much bigger scale and with so much more mystique, and I liked that a lot. This kind of idea of these, especially if they haven't had to do anything in a while. Because if you're living on just reputation, then it opens up the idea that someone's going to poke a hole in it. Someone might go, they haven't done anything in years. We're all just reacting to the name. They've all gone fat and lazy, only to be proven wrong or be proven right. Both are interesting stories.
And I like the idea of having like a bunch of hackers and stuff being a part of this group too, where maybe they, even if they haven't done anything for a while, they go into archives of different things and they will go and hack and alter the history, the written accounts of what happened, and they'll implant things of the unnamed in there. Maybe like starships, they intercept transmissions and they embed some of their own altered data. Like, they don't stop it, they hijack it, throw in their own gobbledygook about the name. So even if the people sent it, they don't even know it's got embedded because they transmitted it, and then command or whoever gets it, whoever they're transmitting to, they'll purposefully keep the transmission going just to further their propaganda of their.
Sorry, I'm starting to type as well because I'm just seeing the name Vulture. I was like, well, why would they pick that name? And kind of going into them. So
What's your ideas?
Yeah, well, yeah, just very much. I love the interplay of different pirate groups because what I was picturing, and which then led me to these guys, was the concept of, if you take Pirates of the Caribbean, the island of Tortuga. There's just this pirate place, lawless.
Okay.
Pirates
yeah.
in charge. And what I was picturing, because I was looking at these guys, and I was like, yeah, if I was to think about another group of pirates, who would I? And just based on those two, I was like, okay, well, I don't know a lot about Sabretooth. But the first thought I have, and just the first sentence of what I've written so far, is vultures or scavengers. So I'm picturing, well, now I'm picturing something else, but what I was picturing is this series of smaller, faster ships. They're not built to attack or really hold their ground. They're built to get in, get out, go. So whether it was an interplanetary conflict, if it was a pirate raid on civilian craft, or even the kind of the aftermath of conflict between pirate bands, anything. If there are bits and pieces of ships for them to pick over, find the useful bits,
Mm-hmm.
find the scraps of goods that other pirates missed, um, they subsist on kind of what was left. So
I
the
love it.
idea of a
All their
scavenging the
ships are kind of
vulture.
hodgepodge pieces from these different types of things, all duct taped together. Yeah,
And
maybe
what
they
I'm
follow
actually
the guilds when they fight the insurrection. The fights happen. They're staying just out of everyone's range, and then once the fights and they all leave, they swoop in and they grab all the fucking pieces that they can.
and I don't know what we would name this pirate substation, but as as I was thinking it, I was like, well, who would build that? Um, and my thought was the group that can't hold a sustained known whereabouts, like the unnamed, can probably be like, yeah, we live here. What are you gonna do about it? So the idea, like between planets, off the normal routes,
Mm-hmm.
kind of just a station built out of debris.
What do you think about throwing it in the wreckage plasma area, the
That
asteroid?
was that was my first thought, and it's a good fit. That was my question, was actually going to be directed towards you, because I was debating on whether putting it there, where they might maybe blend in amongst like the junker towns, or my other thought was that they had like salvaged from that area, like one of the just massive Sicarian space vessels. So
Oh,
there's just this completely damaged, wrecked spaceship hull, and there are just pockets of it drift. Like they've got it drifting on whatever route they've got it drifting on, and then there are just pockets and pieces where they've built
I like
stations and
that. They
things.
repurposed like a huge whatever the main control ship was for the Sakaar when it got wiped out. Yeah, where they don't. It's like so far beyond repair, but because of the sheer size of it, that could be what they live on.
So yeah, they've got little neighborhoods that they've managed to put together. So I'm picturing
Okay.
this is mostly people who are outside of law for whatever reason, but aren't necessarily the guys who want to go attack somebody. So they've kind of just through circumstance just been these kind of mechanics, just kind of the people who work on computers, people who are just kind of inventing things, are
Sure.
just kind of living day to day, not knowing if the oxygen supply is going to fail. So their shit is kind of hodgepodge, was the good word,
Right.
pieced from whatever they could find, and they do good work, but they're building off good knowledge, bad equipment, and a little bit of faith, which,
Sure.
as we already discussed, is probably pretty rare.
Yeah,
So
they'd have to
it's
be very opportunistic type people where they don't do risk management ever. It's just if an opportunity presents itself and we like our water reserves are low and there's this water tanker, fucking everybody just go. Like we'll just we need water. We don't have any. We're all dying of thirst.
and if they turned this like their main thing, my god, my idea of the kind of that Sicarian massive ship that they've been piecing back together in sections, if that was the
So
idea
cool.
of them establishing essentially a pirate haven, saying, hey, we're not going to, you enforce your own rules, you keep your shit together. We're not going to mess with your stuff. Don't mess with our stuff. The agreement, if you dock here, is that if anyone fucks with our shit, everyone else gets your ass off our station.
Sure.
Otherwise, this is a law free zone. Come dock, come refuel, whatever. And they take little pieces off of whatever. And so their main area is how they're kind of sustaining
Yeah,
themselves.
maybe it's like some kind of honor box where everyone pirates just leave piratey things for them. Whatever you can spare. We're not asking for anything in particular. There's no docking fee. If you need fuel and there is excess, take it, but leave something. Like, yeah, I like that. Dude, that's a
So
great
there's
idea.
so there's just this place devoid of rules.
Yeah,
So you're gonna have that scene where in this space cantina, there's just noise and music and people having a good time, and then chairs get knocked back, pistols are drawn, bang bang, somebody's dead, music stops, and then it just starts again.
yeah.
We just like, are we all fighting? No, cool.
He spilled
So
my
that
drink.
just
Give me another drink.
that lawless society. So you're enforcing your own rules, and then
The only rule
there'd
is there
be
is no rules.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea that they're living off that, but the
That would be a
actual
huge polar
crews,
opposite of the section we had with the mediators, where everything was capital punishment kind of a, it's like
yeah.
exact opposite. Yeah.
So they're kind of outside of all rule. And then this group in particular, I was picturing as like you just talk about opportunistic. They probably do all right in this main hub where there's being people kind of contributing and leaving things, saying we're all going to maintain this. But their actual bands, it's okay. Well, we have enough food for tomorrow, so let's fix that.
Sure.
And I just got
And they'll
this.
spend all their fuel to go get a little bit more food, and then they don't have any fuel, so they gotta feed it, feed everybody just to get more fuel. So they're always just constantly trying to get the thing they don't have.
Every day is resource management,
Yeah.
and then occasionally, like, shit, this is happening. We need to be prepared to go in as soon as the guns stop blazing and we can take what we can take.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that.
The image of, I don't know if I want to, because now I'm like in the spaceship turned space station, but I was, both can be used, but I was picturing the idea that they took the frame of a spaceship, and so you just see a ship moving through, and then it just breaks apart into just dozens or more of all these just tinier just vessels, leaving the skeleton breaking off and hitting the pieces. Whether we want to sit down and design, okay, what is that kind of ship called? How does it work? It could very easily be a very basic thing that has room for small ships, or maybe they're all their own. But the idea is that these aren't guys bringing a gun to any kind of fight. They're showing up to take whatever everyone else left behind.
Sure. Maybe the saber tooth could be, because I'm looking at it too for inspiration. The tooth, I picture like it puncturing deep in. Maybe those could be the pirates that board, that have the drills, or maybe part of the ship just like, they just try to get up to a ship and ram into it, just break a fucking hole, and then they just board, or they could have the guys coming in with the drills and try to just puncture, so like, with saber-tooth pirates, if you come across this ship that's just floating in space, if there's just fucking puncture holes all over it,
I like that. It works with the imagery quite well, and then it'd be the kind of thing where they just take everything. Whereas, just as in contrast, the guys going, okay, this is what we need to find today. We need gas. It's just, okay, well, they had this. I don't know if we were looking for this, but we're taking it. I'm picturing these guys as the kind of...
They punch a hole, throw in the bomb, poof, and they shove a vacuum and just suck everything up. We'll sort through it later.
Like the Grinch with his just hoses.
Exactly, just the Christmas tree, the couch, everything just pulled up.
Yeah, just talking about them, I'm picturing less of a pirate for profit kind of organization. It's like the people who were just misused by society, just angry, upset for whatever reason, correct or not, and it's just, okay, I'm gonna find a way to, I'm gonna live my life taking back. So it's less about what did we get today and more about we got something. It was about the boarding and about the kind of message that is, we're here with the saber-tooths.
Are you talking about like not so much we took something, but they lost something?
Yes.
Yeah. Like, yes, we also got it, but we did it because they no longer have another suffering.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I'm picturing. Just to kind
so even if they don't need something, they take it just so they don't have it. Yeah. Okay.
The kind of idea, just like, well, we came across this civilian ship not too far away. Do we have room for stuff in the hold? Yeah, we got room for stuff.
Or if not, yeah, like missiles that are on this ship or torpedoes or whatever. We literally don't have room. They'll just shoot them off into space. Like, you can't have them. Like, we'd rather shoot them off and have some fun than let you have them. Okay.
Especially, just the idea, because now I'm just picturing that same conversation. Do we have room for stuff? What can we take? Oh, cargo hold's pretty full. Okay, well, eject some shit. We don't need it. So just you see this drifting cargo that was probably perfectly fine.
Or they bring some kind of cutter to cut the other ship's cargo area from their ship, weld it to theirs, close it off, so now they can now hold more shit.
Or even the idea that after the raid of whatever survivors, just are you taking stuff? No, we're putting it in the airlock and shooting it out of space.
Just jettisoning it out.
The point is, it's not what we're about. So it's just kind of this more
Depravity.
Chaos,
That's
depraved.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm very much liking these guys. They're gonna.
Once they board a ship, they'll just be pulling everything, so their ship starts venting everything into space. Yeah, okay. Interesting.
And then it would be kind of up to the individual Sabretooth. Obviously, they're all not homogenous one school of thought, but it'll be you might get the Sabretooths who want to leave an empty ship floating in space. Like, yeah, we took everything, including life. And you might get the guys who are just anti-capitalist, anti-thing. And so it's like, yeah, no, we're going to go in this room, we're going to lock it, we're going to vent every other aspect of the ship, and then you can go again.
Right. Or maybe have some of them, like, they figure out the trajectory of, like, they're going here. We'll take everything, but we'll keep the exterior somewhat intact, and we're going to, like, push it back to... It'll eventually get to where it was supposed to go, but it's, like, full of explosions or mines or something. So they'll see, a ship coming that they were expecting, but they're really late. They're super far behind. They send signal, like, no one's communicating, so they send people to a rescue crew. So then they go in to try to find survivors, and, that kind of a thing.
Oh, I'm loving the idea of them sending a ship. There's just like that extreme, someone's going to lose something today. So whatever they did, probably of the line of people who are cool with taking life, but it's just, they're just going to point this ship at that ship and kind of push on the gas, and then we're going to go.
Sure.
Especially if it's that situation, they can confirm their respect. Like, yeah, turn on the hailing frequencies. We want them to know that it's friendly saying hello. And then just a space explosion.
Amazing. Catch.
Pirates are fun.
We are the pirates. All right. Okay. So, any other possible enemy ideas? Obviously, the guild itself will probably become an enemy, and whatever. But is there any other things you can think of at the moment for possible enemies? I heard full of mines, and that's still a pretty terrifying concept. Yeah.
Oh, a ship full of mimes. Now that.
Oh, mimes! I misread that. Full of mimes. That is terrifying.
I've always loved the idea of, I don't know if it would be in a D&D game, but the idea of a character whose power is miming. So if you mime yourself in a box, you're legit in a box. It's just invisible. Just miming into reality. I don't know how I would play that. I just love the concept in whatever form it becomes.
Mr. Mime!
Yeah. So the question I'm coming back to is whether or not we make space completely inhabitable or kind of livable or not. Because that begs the question of whether or not there are actual creatures. And even if we make it not livable, do we have creatures that are of a different kind of biology, anatomy, whatever, and for them it is livable? Because we're already talking about space whales, so on some level, that's going to be true.
Yeah, I want some kind of space creatures. In some capacity. I just think that is just a really cool thing to have. To not every bad guy in space is going to be a ship. I like... Because the fantasy thing, like, that is one thing you try to do with the fantasy tabletop is having diverse monsters that do all these different things and, people corrupted and magics, and all this stuff. The downside of the sci-fi is it's either a ship or a ship or a ship or a ship. I like the idea of having monsters.
Yeah. And what I like about monsters is just the fact that we kind of look at them, how they live, what kind of drives that the primal sense of it, and then they don't necessarily have objectives. You don't have we have to figure out this kind of whose side they're on. Are they bluffing to pretend to be on our side, double bluffing, whatever? It's okay. There's this creature. It's doing this thing. Maybe it's actively against us because it's predatory. Maybe it's an inconvenience to us because it leeches power for sustenance. So we've got space leeches. They're not
Mm.
evil. They're not trying to hurt us, but they're a problem, and we have to get rid of them. And then you have the player characters who say, okay, do what? Do we just what like shock the hull and kill all these space leeches, or
Mm-hmm.
there's the moral questions of what you do with an animal who's inconveniencing civilization but not actually hurting it.
Sure.
Well, not actively trying, like
Well, some
maliciously.
could be, some could not be.
Exactly.
Right.
So I do agree that there should be the concept of creatures. And obviously, planet side will have all sorts of creatures, but the idea that there's space creatures to worry about. Um, we already have the concept of space whales, and then that kind of providing for a enhanced fuel system. Those
Mm-hmm.
guys live in space. They feed off dying stars, exploded stars. That's all very cool. We don't necessarily have to say, yeah, they breathe whatever's in space and exhale whatever is not in space. I don't care. They're space whales.
Mm-hmm.
So,
You don't. One does not question space well.
exactly. So, all we got to do is put a little note on the stat block of space whale that says can breathe in space. Um, and that same goes for the other thing. And I like that idea, like whether we call them a space leech or whatever else. There'll be some things that presumably would feed off electricity, or maybe they also just the ecology of whatever the word would be. The idea that if space whales exist, things that interact with and either hunt space whales or feed off the excess that space whales leave behind, or whatever, just
Mm-hmm.
something came about that interacted with that. And how does that affect us? How does it affect getting space whale fuel
Mm-hmm.
safely? Um, are we helping to protect space whales against these predators? How big is the space whale? How big is the predator? So there's all sorts of very cool things. So really, that's something that'll be separate from these kind of thought out sentient enemies.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I agree. We want creatures in space, and I think that can happen whether we go livable or
Sure.
realistic space.
Or whether or
Um,
not people can, these things can.
exactly.
Right.
I
Okay.
don't know what I want the creature to be, but I'm just loving the mythology of um, a space vampire. I don't know what that means to me. It just hit my brain, and I said, I want that to exist in some way, shape, or form.
Well, you're a
But
dev,
as,
so guess what? It's in the game.
but yeah, I'll think on that and maybe like it or maybe not. But there's going to be, and again, it'll be that kind of idea. It's like, yeah, there's a herd of whatever. They're in the way. They're not a problem. So they
Sure.
creatures provide an interesting alternative because there can be very clear lines drawn up of okay, we oppose them because XYZ,
Mm-hmm.
and
And then there
then
could also be like legislation passed where this is an endangered species. You are not allowed to kill it.
mm-hmm,
And then they run into that thing again, and it's like, okay, it's us or them. Like, obviously, we're not gonna die. We're gonna kill them, but then they get court-martialed or whatever the system. Then they gotta deal with the you know legislative side.
I'm really enjoying it. And whether it's stemming from the concept of a space vampire, I'm not sure what I want to call them, but I like the idea of these creatures that will follow ships in flight. Probably not too close, but the idea that they just kind of track what have become established trade routes, and they just similar to the concept of the vulture pirates. They feed off people. Um, but if say a pirate raid goes, and then some people end up out in space, whether it's livable space and they're trying to get back to a ship, or it's realistic deadly space and they're now a corpse in space, they feed off that.
Hmm.
So there's kind of like this legendary, it's not to say legendary, but like just kind of like the stigma of that, like certain, like black cats got a bad rap for a while. Bad cat,
Mm.
black cat is bad luck. This is the thing that eats the way it eats, but because you'll see them at the site of like exploded ships, so they're just like this bad luck omen in space.
Mm. I just had a thought. Going back to the Z crystals and the elemental affinities and what they could do. Say we disregard the breathable air. What's the air affinity normally for everything else? Mobility.
Yeah,
We haven't figured out planet to planet travel yet. We have the Ventus Guild, who's the transportation guild. They transport people. Why? What if the warp, the faster than light travel that would be required for doing these, what if that requires air? The air element. And if the Ventus Guild is the one who had, you know, res- primarily brings up the air people that drive the shit, whatever. What do you think about that? That's why they need the
yeah.
Ventus Guild, is because they get their air people from there, maybe.
I think it makes sense to have the affinity. Just out of curiosity, do you mean air the element, or like are they making like an actual like tunnel of air through space?
I don't know thematically how it would work.
It makes sense guild wise, but that was just my first question. It's like, ooh, what does that mean? Are they using air elemental energy to kind of just
Make a
kind
worm
of
hole
extra
kind of.
thrust, wormhole, Eisenstein Rosenbridge, whatever
Sure.
different various theoretical science thing we're talking about, or just made up magic thing,
I think it should
just
be
a portal?
magical. Yeah. So
I'm
that
trying to think.
that'd be a
There's a
really
lot of ways we
cool.
could work it.
Yeah, if the air influence on the crystal is what makes you able to do it. So like the dog fighters and all those things, if they wouldn't even have faster than light travel capability if the person didn't even have air affinity.
I like that a lot. It's a good way of tying back to the thing, because if we're going to blend into low magic, but still the concept of sci-fi fantasy kind of blending, um, I've always liked doing that in a way where the presence of magic influenced the development of technology.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to the crystals we talked about using those different auras, it makes sense that they were like, yeah, we can do this magical thing, and we needed to get in space. It made sense to use magic to do that. I like it, and it kind of cements, yeah, we need these guys, which helps set up kind of more nuanced story stuff. So if you have a conflict with the transport guild, okay, well, how are you going to handle that? Because you can't not be transported.
Sure. And if like the Z that's powering the ship can only do one of these five things at once. You know what I mean? Like you can't be doing the faster than light travel and have shields up, or be able to attack. To attack you'd have to stop doing that. You maybe couldn't have your full capacity to shields because you're channeling it into the fire affinity. So obviously you'd have to have more people on board, part of the guild, from different extensions of the guild. So even like Water Guild ship, they're gonna have people from the Fire Guild on board their ship because they need to be able to shoot. You know what I mean? So like, what if like someone else would interface and then shift it over to Fire Crystal? So instead of red alert, there's a blue alert, a white. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. Where like, I don't know. We don't have to do this, but that's just what I was thinking of, the ship combat that we're eventually gonna start looking at. What if there's like phases, like you phase the ship to different modes?
Again, I like it, and the more ways we can kind of tie the magical thing into the science thing, the more it all feels like one system. And just thematically, I like the idea of these ships engaged in air element moving at these speeds to get place to place, and then it's combat is initiated. Okay, we have to switch to shields, we're switching to weapons, and then you go from this hyper fast to just kind of like almost still by comparison shot. My head's just picturing it in the movie. So you're just in the uh, hyperspeed of Star Wars, and then you're coming out of hyperspeed. So it's just the idea that you drop, and then now there's this fight.
Right.
So just kind of that dramatic difference between the different modes is going to very much change what everyone on the ship is doing.
And then like
Where if
a
it's going to,
right, like a research vessel or science vessel, obviously they wouldn't even need to have anybody on board that has fire elemental. They would like all of their scientists would be earth people. Or something, like we're protect our own kind of a thing, but we're here just to research this nebula cloud or something like that. You know what I mean? So you wouldn't necessarily need people from different guilds, and that could innately give pros and cons to each type of ships and from different guilds and why they need each other. Does that make sense?
yeah, especially because it kind of helps when we get to the idea of classifying different types of ship. So the idea that you have this aircraft carrier analogy that they need some air element to get from here to there. But the ships on board for defending or assaulting aren't going to have air elemental, but they might have some blend of earth and fire. So you've got one ship to carry the ships, and then other ships. So it just
Right.
so
And
reinforces the idea of designing ships with purpose in mind,
right.
and then just kind of attributing, kind of just again the idea of reinforcing how your affinity is going to help you know how to interact with the world.
Sure. But maybe like if a player was a fire and an air, and they're doing some adventure thing, and then they come across this science vessel with all the people on board only have the protection stuff, or maybe there's one person with the protection stuff, everyone else is researchers. Um, but there's pirates coming in their ships, something else, and they can't use theirs. They have to now commandeer this science vessel to fight off these pirates. But because he has fire affinity, he plugs in his neural implant to interface, and it now has offensive capabilities because he has fire affinity. Do you like that idea, or do you think that's a bad idea? Do we tie it to like turrets on the ships, or do we tie it to the affinity of, do the ships become like an Iron Man suit? You know what I mean? Like whoever ships become extensions of the characters inside of it.
Either kind of methodology could work, whether you tie it to the affinity directly or the whatever the ship has on board, or maybe some blend of it. It's just a question of how fluid we want technology to be. Are ships so advanced that they can reconfigure themselves when someone's attached? Or maybe the offensive nature of fire shows itself in a different way. There's lots of ways to approach it. I very much like the idea of being able to kind of plug in just matrix style and kind of more directly interface with things, and how your affinity might change that. So it's just a question of, do you want to say that this research vessel that had no guns reconfigured itself to have guns?
I don't know, actually. Once you say that, I don't like that. I think maybe we think about the that aura. Maybe the fire element, that bubble of influence, that it could have a fire thing, but it doesn't have turrets, so it can't shoot.
No, it
That
could
way
be
we
the
get the
kind of
best of
thing.
both, because we were talking about before we went live about the the rogue trader version of it being like a Lego thing where each thing has a power consumption and pieces. I like that, and I think that ships that have guns should have more firepower. Um, but I think that we could have best of both of those worlds if we do it to where it's just that aura, or just that thing. Where it doesn't create turrets, and that's not the only way a ship attacks, but it is another way that a ship can deal damage to another ship.
One thing that could be kind of looked at, the hard part is how detailed do we make rules for such a thing? Is so you've got your research vessel, it's got equipment doing various things and tests and experiments. Pirates are coming, you plug me, a fire and air guy in we're kind of trying to do our best to defend from pirates. Now, we could say it's purely aura, or it sounds like leaning against reconfiguring. I think I like that as well. The idea that you could dock in and say we need to reconfigure this, and things are removable and interchangeable, is good. Lets you kind of change your ship as needed, but it shouldn't be just, oh yeah, it's just kind of nanite a la Infinity War and Endgame tech where he just kind of pushes a button and the suit appears. Not that level of just,
sure.
Then just your ship's always what you needed it to be, and then
sure.
choices are made. But the idea that maybe, okay, well, these heating elements that were used for sterilization and this tool for like running electricity through things, these are lab equipments, but they're attached to the ship, and I got a fire element, so I can tell that computer to use them offensively. Now that means we would have to either have rules that say this is what this equipment is for, but if you used it offensively, it would do this.
Mm-hmm.
If you used it offensively with fire affinity, it would not have the whatever disadvantage. Or we could say, yeah, when you interface with a ship, if you have an offensive fire affinity, it will let you use things that are not intended to be used as weapons, but then leave it up to discretion at that point. So
sure.
That opens a ball of wax on how nuanced and detailed do we want to go with the equipment on a ship, or do we want to leave that free form?
Right, and then we also got to think about, too, the secondary elements. So if we are tying interactions of the PCs and NPCs to their ships, these Z crystals have affinity changes. What does it mean if the person controlling it not only has water, but they also have air, and they do both? Or two people are doing it together, and one is water, one's air. Well, then we have an ice thing. So do we then also think of secondary things that this outer ring of elements augment ships, or do we stick to just the inner circle for ships, just for simplicity?
I mean, I guess if we thought experiment out, because my first thought, if we have ships be modular, the idea that systems have elemental affinity, or are more likely to interact with an elemental affinity. So your main guns, your turrets, whatever, will work better with someone with a fire affinity. They're still going to shoot. They're still guns.
Sure.
But the fire affinity user will kind of interface with it more seamlessly. The idea that a med bay would work better with a water element, the engines with air, and so on. That begs the question of what kind of system is going to be a blend of two elements, and is that something where we want to have it be that, or it might be just that, yeah, you have water and air affinities, so if if a system has an affinity that you share, you get the bonus, you get to interact with it on that extra level.
What if there's 5 control stations to a ship? Fire, air, earth, lightning, water, whatever. Run with me on this.
Sure.
Say you need to, like we were saying, well, the air one could maybe be the faster than light travel. What if it's the magnet? And the air and the lightning have to be working together to do the magnet. Like we assign these outer things to be functions that the ship can do, and you can only do that if those 2 of the 5 are focusing their action together to do that thing. So you want to faster than light travel, your air and your lightning, whether that be engineering and medical or the bridge or whatever these 5 stations are of the ship. Like you said, the gunnery thing is a fire thing. It's not the fire station, it's the gunnery. But we could use this format to kind of have it pledge over. So, for instance, like the gunnery, it could just shoot like the fire, that one of the 5, right? It could just shoot. But then you throw in the engineer could then patch in those 2 things together and it could be steam. So it could then have that something thematic. It's not steam, but you know what I
Sure.
mean, like some burning aura around the ship. Or you could do smoke. You could patch in the gunnery with the warp core or whatever the air thing is, and it could be smoke. So then you could then surround the ship in this nebula discharge where they can't see where you are, and then radars can't penetrate through. You get what I'm saying? I don't know if this is going way too far off. What do you think of that? Of having 5 portions of a ship that do different things and they combine. So that would, the players, when they're all doing things, they could take different stations in the ship, and they would have to, whoever's ever captaining or whatever, giving the orders, would have to be evaluating the pros and cons. Like, if we do this thing, fire and earth are going to be down, or they're going to be occupied. So we can't do these other things unless that thing stops. So then what do the other 3 do?
No, I guess it begs the question because I like the modularness of it. There's somebody's in charge, and then these different systems have to interact with each other. Um, Now, does that mean every ship, no matter how small, is going to have some representation of every element? Or does that mean that maybe a smaller ship um, they're all going to have some sort of engine, they're all going to have some sort of air base. Um, but maybe a smaller ship has some light defensive weaponry, but it mostly has earth and air, and they don't even have room for a med bay. So do they have some representation of all 5 to interact? Or maybe the way you built your ship, you have those combos.
Yeah, like a smaller one, I think wouldn't even be able to have all 5. So maybe that's how we could set up the class. Oh, that's the class system for ships, of how many affinities they have.
Oh.
So you could have a small water vessel. That would be like the healing dog, that we talked about, like having one that does that. But that could be your classes of vehicles, is how many they can possibly have, and based on how you built them, you could pick, I want water and earth or air and lightning or whatever, and they could only do the things. If we
Well, I like the idea
assumed
that
they can all fly, they can all fly, they can all hold people, they all have a shitter, or whatever, maybe not the dog play. You know what I'm saying? Like these core essential starship thing they all have, but then they're mechanical extras. Game mechanical extras could be the small ones have 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. Then your massive capital ships have all 5, and they can do anything they need to. So like that Quatorium ship has access to all these anything, so it could react to anything. With maybe the guild ones, maybe the biggest one the guilds have are 4. So there's going to be that section of it that they can't do, because when they built it, they picked water, lightning, fire, and air, but they don't have earth. So the 4 that require earth, they can't do.
I think that's a very convenient way to kind of build in a tier system for ships. This is a class 3. It's got this many affinity slots. The way I had approached it in my head, and I think tying into affinities directly works, was the idea that you, again, class it by system. It's just a question of, do we want to say this can only have 4, or do we want to say let's say they all have, a place to steer the thing, a place to power the thing, and a
Mm-hmm.
place to maintain, you know, an
Life
environment
support.
people can
Yeah.
live in. And then they have, okay, this is a tier, this is a class one. It has one subsystem. So do you put guns? Do you put a med bay? Do you put a research lab? Do you put extra shielding? Whatever your subsystem is, and then they go up. So in my head, there would be the concept of, I don't know how high we go. Let's say 20 subsystem is the largest ship. That's the Quatorium, and the biggest ship a guild has ever made has only got 17. That leaves the person, the designing the ship, the idea, okay, yeah, I have 17 fire subsystems. This is a fire ship.
Oh, okay.
So that would leave the idea that smaller ships can still achieve the 5 interaction, but we don't necessarily have to do that because it does lend something to the significance of the Quatorium that they are the only ones that can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's still a limitation. Or maybe they've got, okay, yeah, we split to this many gun subsystems. We designated this many subsystems to a massive med bay because we're anticipating wounded. We've got this, that, and the other.
Sure.
Um, where they might have different ratios, but I don't know if I want to necessarily dive into, okay, you've got 40% fire, so that lets you do this. So
Yeah.
as I'm just talking about the idea out loud, I'm seeing some of the
Headaches.
issues
Yeah.
there. Yeah. So I guess so there could be an affinity class system, which we could limit to 4 for anyone not in the Quatorium, and then just the size of the ship. This is a class 3
Mm-hmm.
dreadnought, so it's a big ass ship. It's got 3 affinities. So that way you've got, we have room for med bays and whatever other nonsense we need in the ship. But yes, then you could have a class system tied to affinity, which could then let you know what extras the ship could do, while still leaving room for the sci-fi stuff of,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we've got a hangar for smaller ships or whatever else this ship needs to function in its role that we've assigned it. So yes, just talking out loud. This is what I like about developing. Anybody watching who wants to develop, this is why we do it.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
please join
Sonny, you've
us.
been spitting out
Um,
some good ideas, man. Maybe certain types, qualities of ships are more compatible with certain elements, like a research ship would be more compatible with air element to help it evade, perhaps. Yeah, maybe what we should do is dive more into what other systems do for ships and then come back. That's kind of how we
yeah,
do everything is we kick some concepts, put pins in all of it, do something else that is related, and that kind of helps inform those decisions.
because reading that comment from Sonny, I was looking at it. I was like, well, that feels to me like the question of which came first, the chicken or the egg.
Mm.
So, does a research ship have more affinity for air, or did they build an air affinity ship because they needed a research ship? So I think they go hand in hand. That kind of it tugs both ways.
Sure.
What affinities we have available? What do we need from the ship? So I think as we kind of develop what scale of how big a ship's going to be, what we need ships to do, what kind of features a ship might have, we can go, med bay uses, we thought of a med bay, it'll have water affinity. Or we thought of this other system, and kind of come up with a list, whether or not it's comprehensive, rough draft, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then just kind of assign functions of a ship to elemental affinities.
Mm-hmm.
And some stuff like, okay, there's a break room, a rec room. It doesn't need an elemental affinity. Some aspects of the ship are not
Sure.
going to be tied to it, sure. But then find the stuff that makes sense, the stuff that would, the stuff that allows the ship to be more than an airplane, that needed magic to get into space, those key functions, and then some of the stuff that, like a med bay, I mean, you're going to have that on like an actual naval vessel now, but to elevate it to sci-fi space levels, they needed magic, stuff like that. So once we define what the systems are going to be, we can kind of figure out, okay, here's the elements that make sense. I don't think we necessarily have to worry we should have the same number of fire elemental stuff to this, that, and the other.
Sure.
Let's find the stuff that makes sense for ships, and then find how they make sense with elemental affinities. And then that can all tie in, say, okay, your ship is a class 2, it's this big, what 2 affinities do you want to have? And then what subsystems do you want to have? Which might mean that somebody and we would have to decide, does somebody who picked an air earth to try and have a fast moving, durable ship be able to escape danger? Can they not have a med bay because it's not water affinity? or is their med bay kind of more a cookie cutter standard like retail package? Yeah, we shoved a med bay on there. It's got the sci-fi gear that everybody gets, but you're not going to have a water elemental guy there who can really help in a pinch.
Sure.
So it's
Well, I
I
think,
like
yeah, I like that idea, but also we look at it wouldn't just be a water guy, right? It would be a water guild person. So for a earth water combination vehicle, that would require the water guild and the earth guild working together, commission this ship to have this specs and work together and allocate it for the fleet of whoever's going to, you know what I mean? So if we made it more regimented and not just, you know, raise your hand if you're a water guy. All right, you're hired. You know,
sure.
if it comes from the fleet that way. So that way, if, say, for instance, the fire guild turns on the other four, you know, like, does the other guild's weapon systems not work? Like, how do we...
Now, what I think would make sense, just as a first blush, would be the idea that, okay, you have a class 2, you picked water and earth. That means you're not hardware, not the actual systems you built on there, med bay, guns, whatever, but the actual software running it is set up so that people with those affinities can kind of use their neural link to use those two in tandem in ways that most ships can't.
Right.
So that means you can figure out how to make wood magic work. Whatever that means for a spaceship when we get there.
Sure.
Now, you still have guns. They still shoot.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not going to get as much out of them. They're not going to be able to integrate.
Yeah, if we thought of it more of feats, like the ice feat, the smoke feat, the lava feat. So they all still do basic things based on the Legos of how they built their ship. There's so this much space, everything takes this much power, blah, 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 blah. You still keep that. Your ship can only do hardware what it could do. But then those who are interacting with whatever designated affinities based on the tier, and you decide what it is, those are the feats that you get.
So just like picking that wood magic. So you've got healing and protection. So maybe you pick those. The other ship's got shields. But if you have some trained guild people running them and they interact appropriately, yours are self-replicating. So you've got protection that kind of grows back at a rate the other doesn't. So
right, and I think non-guild starships shouldn't have these at all. So maybe we don't make these a requirement for ships in general.
No, and that's why I like where we're going with the idea of hardware versus software. So here's all the subsystems for a ship. Okay, you built a ship, you built a ship, you built a ship. Guild guys. The guild has developed their own way of kind of interconnecting things.
They plug their fucking brain chip in.
Yeah. And then they've got the guys who are hardwired to use it. So, yeah, you built a ship and I built a ship, and they're the same. But I have guild programming for air and...
which will be far superior. They won't be able to do any of these elemental things. Okay.
So the idea that it's a combination of kind of like some guild-made programming that tells the ship that, hey, these systems are going to interact in this way. That's guild-designed. And then these people are guild-trained to use this guild-built program.
It kind of be like Inner Sphere and Clan mechs for Mech Warrior. Yeah. Okay.
So that way you still have the idea of, yeah, machines are machines. They're built to do a thing. They do a thing. But then a way for the introduction of magical affinities to impact that in a meaningful way.
Non-clan ships won't even have a setup to where there's a neural link at all. It's not like a clan person could go onto a regular ship and plug in and augment it. It doesn't even have the hookups. It doesn't have any of the network in the ship. It's just a fucking ship. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, only the guild... I said clan. The guild ships...
Guild, clan, whatever.
...even have those hookups. Okay. And that's why people who want to be adventurers want to be part of a guild, because their ships can do the cool shit. That's where they can go do the things. And okay.
Yeah, guild's going to get you access to the best trainings and the best equipment. And I mean, people from all stripes, especially for designing the idea of affinity to just be kind of like random genetic chance, where it's kind of it's spread across
DNA lottery, yeah.
Races, backgrounds. Like, hey, you won the genetic lottery. You were raised in poverty. Guess what? You're a guild now. It's this kind of ultimate equalizer.
And then if we have the pirates not having elemental affinity, so they're going to have regular ships. They're going to be regular people. But then the incursion bad guys, because they were part of the guild, they all have affinities. Maybe they didn't return these guild ships. So they're still on the manifest, but they, fucking, like, these are ours now.
Yeah. So either they ripped them out, or maybe they jury-rigged their own that don't work as well. Maybe they worked with the gnomes to make something.
Okay.
So there's lots of options that could go that way. Now, my question about affinity, now, as we're talking about it, are we saying that basically everyone with affinity ends up in a guild? Or the guild only accept affinity? So
guild only accept affinity.
So there are some people who will have affinity and exist elsewhere?
Yes, but where are they going to get their training?
Sure, and that's what I wanted to clarify. So the idea that there might be an affinity guy in the Sabertooth Pirates, but he's not going to have the hookup and everything. So that was just my question. I wanted to establish just how that was said.
Now, I'm not going to say it'd be impossible for someone who's trained in the guild to then be insurrection, like pull themselves from it, find another affinity person, and then train them. So that person's backstory could be, I have this knowledge and I can do these things, even though I wasn't brought up in the guild. But somebody originally had to have the knowledge.
Yeah, it's got to come from somewhere.
Right. Well, you want to take a quick break?
Yeah, let's use a glass of water.
Sure. Okay. All right. Hopefully everybody's having fun. We're not done yet. We're going to take a quick break, maybe 5 or 6 minutes, and we'll come back. I want to choke down a cigarette, so we'll be back, and we'll keep going. We really appreciate all the comments in chat. All the help we can. We are looking for some more devs too, so if you guys are enjoying any part of this, join our Discord, hop into the world building, fill out the application, and we'll get back to you. We're wanting more and more people to join this team. It's lots of fun, but we'll be back in just a couple minutes. All right, we are back. Thanks for sticking with this. Hey, you guys, some food. I was shaking. I'm so hungry. I haven't eaten for a while. All right. So we have been talking about neural implants, talking about magic, talking about starships. yeah, so we can dive further. I haven't done much scrolling in the book yet, which is totally fine. We're just developing things. Something real quick I wanted to bring up was the idea for hand seals. So since we're talking about magic, so I had posted this in Discord. It's on the Twitch if you can't see it. So when people have the affinities, my idea was pulling from like Naruto, where people have like the hand seals that they do their, uh, use their chakra and all that stuff to the magics. I really like that idea, and so we don't have to use it, but I was thinking it'd be kind of cool. And if we had a certain hand seal idea, like signal for each of the elements, and when you create your character and you choose your first affinity, if there was a hand seal that you always did to invoke that magic, it'd be for that, the one side, because you can have up to two. And so, like, say you wanted to do water, then you would, with, the one, whichever dominant or indominant side that you picked, that would be the side that you have the affinity on, and you would have to do whatever that, if you have lightning, whatever, that's what you do to start it, and then there could be additional hand seals for which spells that you do, and then when you pick up your second affinity, you do the other side. So say you wanted to do a wood type spell, you'd have to do water with one side and earth with the other, and then like do the other additional seals for if it's level 1, 2, or 3 for it. So you have to do the thing, so that way you got the kind of the fantasy version of the verbal somatic material. That version, it's going to be all with the somatic, with the hand signals. What do you think of that idea? Sorry,
I've liked the signals. Of course, we've talked about it already. So anyone in chat who likes or has thoughts on the signals,
sure,
feel free to pipe in. But I've liked it. It's just a kind of a clean way of being like, yeah, you're casting spells. There's a thing to it, without having to go into minutia. You have pig's blood and the raven feathers that were picked under a full moon.
Sure,
and have their own place in RP. It's interesting to see people kind of take those to heart and describe how they're casting a spell, which can be very cool. This keeps it very simple. The other fun thing is I can do this. So I can be like, yeah, I'm going to cast an air spell.
Right.
And then I can do the other thing. The question that I have that comes to mind is, because I was thinking about it, it's like, could I do all these? It doesn't ever matter, but I have a bruised tendon. So I don't know how well people can see it, but one pinky can only go that high, and the other can go this high. So how would... I like the hand signs as a kind of a clean denotation of here's my affinity, here's how I cast it. I was joking in Discord that everyone's going to want to be lightning if they're cool.
Right.
But the immediate question I have, if we're trying something physical, how perfect does the hand sign have to be? Or is it individual to the caster? That I think is a little bit hectic, but the other...
do we set it up to where there's like a skill check that you do to see, is there like a success threshold? And you maybe have a penalty for having a disformed hand, or say your creature or your character gets an arm cut off. Does that mean he only gets one affinity then?
True. The other flip side is the sci-fi aspect of things, because we've talked about cybernetics and like the gnomes in particular going into like kind of experimental augmentation stuff. Is there going to be a Star Wars level? Luke got his hand cut off, so now he's got a robot hand. In which case, something like a physical incapability of making a sign might not be a permanent issue.
What if somebody got a third arm attached? Do they now get a third elemental affinity? I don't want to have that, but like that is something we got to think about too. Is if there is these prosthetic or augmented limbs.
I think the aspect of channeling the magic and having that affinity, kind of the hand sign is a way of focusing it and bringing it forth,
Sure.
but without like if you're pumping a dry well, it doesn't mean much.
Right.
So it might mean that somebody with like attached a third arm to themselves has opened themselves up to be able to cast two-handed magic while still wielding something.
Okay.
There might be other applications for a third arm,
But not open it. Okay. Good. Good point.
I think your affinity determines kind of where that energy comes from.
Should we have multi-limbed races? So, for instance, like the lizard folk or the Coloptera, they could easily be a, not a quadpedal. They could be a whatever six sectpedal, or like what do you like? Machamp Pokemon. He's got like 4 arms. Do we have a race that has that? So that would be a huge benefit of that race. I mean, the Coloptera, if they're insectoids, a thing of insects is having multiple limbs, so that could be a thing. Is that something we shy from, or do we embrace it? Where, how does... I know it's a little off the beaten path of the direction we're going, but might as well be something to address anyway.
Yeah.
Can they wield more weapons? Can
I
they...
genuinely like the idea of having that. And it's a question of mechanically how much of a difference does that make?
Because that seems extremely broken, to have a race that can dual wield while being able to do spells at the same time. Like, why would you not pick that race?
The question there is how independently can each limb move? Now, there'd be a big difference between being able to take like a staff and being able to hold it with 2 hands on one side and effectively wield it what would essentially be one hand with two hands. You've got more oomph. And then the difference of, pat your head, rub your tummy at the same time.
Okay. What about a General Grievous thing, though? Where he busts out 4 fucking lightsabers. That isn't a far-fetched thing in a sci-fi fantasy area where we're already talking about body augmentation and those kind of things. What's stopping somebody from, say, elbow down, cutting their arm off, and then have a prosthetic one that can branch into 2 arms? Or we could
theoretically
just say you can't do that.
Sure.
But is that an option? Is that a thing that we just make a thing? Or not?
If we plan on something like that, then we would just have to account a cost for it. So if you want to remove your arm just below the elbow and have a cybernetic, okay, it's going to take a lot of credits. The more credits if you go to somebody who's qualified, capable, and can guarantee it's going to work. And then if we had a multi-limbed race, like made the Coloptera have 4 arms, then maybe there'd be a racial feat they could take, and again, it would probably be somewhat expensive to be. We're gonna say ambidextrous, but I guess it would be omnidextrous. To be able to kind of independently coordinate all those limbs, rather than having them move in sync to accomplish one goal.
Sure.
So it might be a thing where they don't inherently get, you can wield 4 weapons. It'd be like, oh, no, you can probably move heavier things. You've got an extra set of muscles there.
Sonny said, how would that work with the cuddle or just any species that doesn't necessarily have fingers?
That is a good point, going back to the hands.
Yeah, that is a really good point. Let's take a look at our playable races. Coloptera is in this group of do they have fingers or not. We could easily just say they have fingers, but Cuddle don't. We were talking about them not being able to be affinity, though. I thought, right?
It had been discussed, so it's a question of whether
Because they wouldn't be
And
able to get the brain chip thing anyway. So could they even be part of the guild? Because they gotta, or could they get the implant? I don't know.
because we've gone back and forth on whether or not we want to ultimately have them be playable, because the suit interconnectivity, there's a lot of questions that go straight to that make kind of the mechanics of playing a cuddle somewhat complicated. I would say that affinity is kind of an internal thing, which would mean that we would need to account for how to focus it. I would say that the concept, granted, I don't know because you're pulling it from source material. I'm not super familiar with Naruto. I don't know exactly what they're like. Here's why we use hand signs. But in my first reaction to the concept is, yeah, you have this magical infinity. You need some way to focus it and use it.
That's essentially why they use it, as their chakra needs a way to be channeled, so it's like the focus point,
So it's not necessarily that this hand symbol means fire things are going to happen. It's that you, through repetition and training and focus, are attaching the concept of your elemental affinity to this hand sign and kind of making like a mental and muscle memory coordination to then help you do it. Mm-hmm. In which case, if the cuddle have their kind of humanoid suit with humanoid hands, it could be the same kind of concept. You're still training your brain to kind of make a connection between using that element to a motion. In this case, it would just be a feedback to the machine that they're using. It would still require the hand movement. With the Caliptera, it's same concept, and it's just a question of whether or not we want to innately let them be able to use one hand for symbols and they've got multiple hands free if we give them multiple hands. My other question is, if they have 4 arms, are they all humanoid fingered hands? Do they have a set of insectoid claws and then a set of humanoid?
Or they could have like little tiny like lobsters, they got the little tiny ones down here. Maybe they could be utilized for something else, but they're not like a main appendage. Like they could have this 2 main appendages, but then these smaller ones that could maybe hold something or something like that, like a bonus action-y type of thing, but not a main action.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways we can mechanically look at having 4 arms if that's something we want to do. And I've always liked the idea of a 4-armed race because it's just cool in my brain.
Sure.
But it's just a question of that. And someone brought up the idea that suits could be altered, especially if, because A, they're very good with tech, but B, if they're going to get with the guild's going to make it work. So,
well, do we have the cuddle be in the guild, or are they outside of it? Having them outside of it might be kind of fun, and having them, there's several routes we could take. Either they are an NPC race only, or they're a not recommended but can be a PC, based on GM discretion. Kind of like how the mystics, like you could have a mystic, but it's not recommended because it won't balance. But if we do set the gameplay of is to be an adventurer, one has to be within the guild, and you get the brain chip and the affinities. Either we have to find a way for the cuddles to also have that to be it, or they don't. But then how do they become an adventurer if they're outside of it? Do they are Sicarians, so they are utilized? And then we also got to look at the Sicar is the steam element in the water and the fire, so if we pull them out of the guild being able to use them, then there's that hole that gets caused, of the water fire steam combination. Not having that, I think, will cause a problem.
Well, the way we've set up being able to choose a second element, there won't be an inherent species that has those affinities dominantly, but people will still be able to choose it. So it's a question, because at the moment we don't necessarily have anybody who's got a inherent plasma affinity.
That's true.
So it's a question like that combo will still be represented, by people who started with whichever element and then chose the secondary. Um, and the cuddle still exists, providing that combo as an inherent affinity if we don't have them in the guild. I guess I'm of two schools of thought. Um, they're living on reputation at the moment
Mm-hmm.
because of their their fleets getting wiped out. So either they would completely cut themselves off from the guilds. They don't want to be a part of it. They don't want any unnecessary exposure. Or on the flip side, they might have a segment of their own people that they are also bluffing to better kind of represent that lie. They've got people who they have just led to believe that the stories are true. They've shown them the face that anyone who visits Sakaar is allowed to see in the very controlled areas that says, look at our military might. And says, yeah, you've been chosen. You're gifted. You get to be part of the guild, man. You represent the cuddle. And so there are cuddle members of the guild who are reinforcing the reputation of the cuddle because they think it's true.
Mm.
So kind of like the idea of just a sleeper cell. This is like, yep, you don't know you're doing our bidding, but you are. So there's those two schools of thought that come to my mind on whether or not they would be part of the guild.
Sure.
As far as kind of the aspect of how we get them to be able to use magic, it's the good part of fiction. We can find rules to bend and change.
Sure.
I think if we call it chakra, affinity, whatever, it's an internal thing. We just have to tie it, the hand signs or a focus. We can find a way to work with that to turn mental focus into physical attribute for a cuddle. They would just
right.
be mimicking it.
Right. If the physical being of the cuddle, even though it's, whatever, if that thing has the affinity and the suits were set up to be able to accommodate that affinity to where the suit doing it is the focus to channel it, I don't think anybody would bat an eyelash. Like everyone else can do it. They need to be able to do it. It just works. I don't see a problem with that.
It works, I think, very well. The cuddle, are this kind of advanced, growing tech culture, and especially if we're having them be part, if we choose to have them part of the guild's got this affinity tied software connection for ships. I think they can find a way to tie a single affinity into a suit. So yes, we've tested you. You're joining the guild. You have a fire affinity. We've worked that right into the wiring.
Because there would need to be non-affinity cuddle.
Yeah, sure.
A majority, 999 out of 1,000 of them, would be non-affinity. Right? So the cuddle people inherently don't need to have an affinity. Just the ones that do.
Yeah.
And do join the guild. It could even be a rare thing that a lot of them don't.
Yeah, and it'd be that same concept because we talked about the idea of hardware versus software. So it's the guild programming that allows for affinity connections. So Cuddle joins the guild. Well, okay, we know how to program for affinity. We're going to plug in, change your suit a little, and it's now going to help you use a conduit, and then we'll kind of train you on how you focus that. And just for efficiency's sake, if they have a humanoid suit and they can just the mental whatever connections between the cuddle and their suit that lets them control it and move it, form that hand sign. If the focus is the mental connection tied to an action, it wouldn't make sense for them to come up with a whole new system for cuddle. They're like, yeah,
sure.
We're teaching these guys to do this hand sizzle. Do your equivalent of this hand sizzle on this suit. We'll teach you all the same guild training.
Should we nix the idea of different suits for cuddle then? Because this suit size that we're talking about, the medium one, would have, arms, legs like a humanoid. But then we had the smaller one that was the multi-limbed, really fast, nimble, no armor, kind of thing. And then there was the big tanky build. We could always nix that whole idea. Even though it was cool, not every cool idea should be used. Especially if we want to make them a playable race, because we're talking about how do we even work that. If we just got rid of that whole concept and just said cuddle, use these suits. Period.
I think,
It would make them humanoid in that sense.
yeah, I think bar none, for a player character, that's all they're ever going to see. If we decide we like the idea that it fits everything else we're doing for the cuddle, I think most of them are affinity. Most of them don't care if their suit changes. It would make sense society for their society if we wanted to keep that idea that some like nimble worker suits are used for minute tasks. Humanoid suits are built for going off world to accommodate the fact that most things are built for humanoid people, and then guild people in particular get stuck there because they need the affinity programming, and then the war machines are war machines that we weren't going to give the players anyway. So
Sure.
there's a way to work it if we want to decide we want to keep those ideas. But of course, you're correct. If it, just because we like an idea doesn't mean it has to stay or should stay. So it's something we should look at for sure. But I think definitely the player character gets humanoid suit. That's it.
Okay. Yeah, if we just made the smaller suit inferior in every way, a player would never want to take that over the small suit. And then, I mean, the big one. I mean, it could easily even be that the humanoid suit sits and controls the tanky thing. So, like it doesn't necessarily have to pull the ball and put it into it. Even though that's a cool idea. Um,
Yeah, I mean, looking at kind of some of the
I
other
mean, anybody
concepts
could
we
operate a
have,
tank at that point.
sure.
You know what I mean? So,
Kind of looking back at some of the origin ideas of the Cuddle suits and the fact that they got them from Terran equipment, they are kind of a fast moving, fast adapting, short lived group. But if there's a sense of tradition, if there's kind of a sense of we know we're not going to be here long, so we've established these things to kind of connect us to the people who came before, and the people who are leaving are getting connected to the people coming in, essentially, however we're going to let them phrase that, then maybe they're humanoid suits because that's what they started with.
mm.
And while they've innovated and changed things, there's just kind of a sense of this is our roots and it's worth remembering.
Mm-hmm. And also, yeah, like you're saying, like if everything else is for humanoid type creatures, it would make sense to have a body that can interface easily with everything.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Sonny said if the cuddle suits can allow them to use magic, maybe Zed crystals, maybe that could make the other guilds view them as lesser, but they don't outwardly say anything because of their military strength or perceived military strength.
So it might be a thing, I guess we're talking about the idea that maybe the affinity who don't end up with a guild can still learn a little bit of magic. And maybe the Cuddle have difficulty with that just because of the focus involved and the way it's worked so far is that actual use of physical limbs. So without that kind of outside training.
But then we would have to put that into every other class that person could take. If we're gonna have Cuddle be a playable race, it almost needs to be kind of like every other one with its own differences, but mostly the same, just like every other race. Like, yes, dwarfs and minotaurs are different than orcs, but they essentially can do the same tasks. Some are a little bit better, some are stronger, some are faster, some more con, but essentially they can do everything the same. It seems kind of like Cuddle need to be in that same ballpark or have their own thing. Like they're just so different where it's not even applicable and they have their own thing. But for playable races, I don't know if that works. What do you think of that?
You're definitely right that if they're going to be playable, then you have to be able to say that, yeah, they can accomplish the same tasks. And obviously every race and guild different have their own, naturally suited capabilities. The hard part about making them so different is it's going to kind of polarize the class, which isn't necessarily, an unattractive bad thing.
Well, it's not even a class; it's a race.
Yeah, sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Race. So it's going to kind of very much pull people to one side of positive or negative. You'll see kind of.
Because I don't want to come up with different classes for the Cuddle, or like what that would mean the easier thing would be to just make the classes how we want them and each of the races can do them, quote unquote, equally with minor variances,
Hmm.
and just group cuddle up in that. Having a biohacker differential for a cuddle, that sounds like a huge pain in the ass, and I think it would be harder to learn too.
I guess then we don't have to make them a playable race, which is a fair point. So if we want to keep some of the stuff that's going to be too complicated to try and balance and make sure it's fair and all that, we can relegate them to that status. That question being, um, if we want them to be playable and we want them to kind of be a little more similar to everything else, do we want to change them in any way? Right now, we've got them smaller fish inside these kind of tanks that need suits.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want them to have evolved to be more humanoid? They still need water, this water to survive. They still need a suit, like an
Okay.
enviro suit, but kind of along the lines of a D&D Triton, where it's a humanoid aquatic person. So we can give them maybe because they've got
Sure.
these little squiddy bits. So maybe kind of pull some of the imagery of Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean.
Sure.
So you've got
First
the
thing I was saying
squiddy,
was Mind Flayer. Yeah.
yeah, Mind Flayer, same kind
Yeah.
of tentacle face, but keep the. But then if they've evolved to be more, um, or adapted to be more humanoid, especially if they were working off Terran
That would get rid
technology,
of a lot of problems.
then they live underwater. They need water to survive. They've got a suit, but it's not necessarily a mechanical. I need it to
And
interact
maybe,
with the world
yeah, and
suit.
maybe just their baby form is a cuddle. So we can still keep that thing that we liked, but like an infant obviously wouldn't fit in a suit. Maybe they kind of like a Pokemon evolution thing, where like they change form and their adventuring age, their maturity, they're now humanoid shape. Maybe they keep a lot of the same features, but yeah, I think that would get rid of a lot of problems.
And with the kind of advanced tech kind of growth that they've had, it opens up the concept of, did they change and adapt over time naturally because they were using stuff built for Terrans, so they changed to match, or
Okay.
did they learn how to engineer themselves and so made changes, proactive choices to say, rather than just kind of, oh, we've adapted over time, so our bodies just kind of naturally grew to fit the stuff we were using? Or did we find out that this stuff's hard to use? It would make more sense if I had fingers, and we figured out how to do that genetically, just
Mm-hmm.
an engineered change. In which case, it's some thoughts going to have to go into that if we go down that path. But it's an
Yeah.
interesting concept of a society that's chosen its own idea of a perfect form.
He was saying maybe like Abe from Hellboy movie. That's not a bad idea.
Like Hellboy. Now I'm getting out in my brain's remembering that they were talking about making a new one at some point, and I don't want to take that because I'm thinking about that. But yes, Abe is very cool, and he does need that water wherever he goes.
Like over the gills. Yeah, so instead of it
Yeah,
being a whole suit, it could just be a water apparatus that he carries on the gill points wherever we put that on the body. That actually would make it fits. I mean, we could even get rid of the radiation factor too, or we could keep it, but just make them more of a typical playable race with the flair of it.
I mean, the radiation, we might not necessarily say they have to have that specific kind of water to survive, but that radiation theme helps explain comic
Sure,
book style
sure.
how they got from cuttlefish to where they are now. So just massive mutations in a short period of time led to kind of this increase in intelligence and a change in form. And so it's story stuff rather than
Mm-hmm.
having to worry about, do they have a spare tank of radiated water all the time. And considering we're talking about people in space who are going to be having an oxygen mask with them just in case something goes wrong and a hull breach happens, it's not super far fetched to have to say, oh, but do I have to worry about water? Yes, but you do that, and it's accommodated for, because
I
why wouldn't
think,
you?
yeah, if an Abe sapien, if they're uh, say their gills are on their neck and the thing has a pocket of water for them to breathe through, where they don't breathe air. Say space was unbreathe, there wasn't oxygen. they essentially, but it wasn't harmful to you though either. An
Mhm.
ape sapien essentially could then also be out in space and breathe because they already have a thing that they
Yeah,
have
they're already wearing a breather.
the all the time. So that could be a really cool thing about Sicarians.
Ooh, especially because we've made them into this tech society. So the idea that not necessarily it's like, oh yeah, you're Sicarian, we're going to make you do this because obviously free will, whatever your
Sure.
interests. But many of them are naturally suited to the concept of kind of engineering and repair. So you might see just a squad of Sicarian mechanics on the outside of a ship just fixing shit.
Okay, and that's why the guilds could like to have them is they are really good at doing this. Okay. It would make sense to use a Sicarian to do the things outside the ship over somebody else. Not that somebody else couldn't do it, but yeah, it would be a favorable trait. Okay.
And that's one of those things like that's kind of a racial difference that's fun. It would come up situationally, but it won't be such an overwhelming, unbalanced thing where it's like, okay, well, everyone's going to be a Sicarian because they've got this cool thing that makes them
Mm-hmm.
so much better. Where it's like, okay, well, they've got a breather already, so space
Well,
might
that
not matter
that
as
comes
much.
with a cost, though. You
Yeah.
got to keep putting water in that bitch, or if that thing breaks, you're suffocating. So there is downsides to it. Say they get overtaken by pirates or something, and they're trying to strip them of everything. What happens if they take that apparatus? Well, your character is now suffocating when everyone else is fine. So there is downsides to it. I think that balances out. It's not too game breaking at all. Um,
Yeah. Like the racial stuff that we give people is going to be like just like this, where it's like, okay, they breathe water. Well, okay, well, that means they don't breathe air. So
mhm.
it's different. It's interesting. Maybe if we have to do something underwater, hey, guess what? You guys need breathers. I get to take mine off. Cool advantage. But it's
Exactly.
not going to be such a big deal
Right.
that it's going to sway anything. And I like that's the kind of thing that as we develop, I think we're going to come up with cool stuff for various races. Of like, yeah, this is a fun flavor bit. It's going to be a cool element if and when it comes up. But it's not going to be like, oh, I need to take this race because it does this thing.
Sure. When it does come up, it's like, oh, cool. I also get this feature, but not like a bow before me because I happen to pick the right race in this moment. Right. Okay.
And I think
Okay.
that then that gets us around. So that was an excellent question on suits and how they use it. Uh, it just life picked humanoid shape, and that's a very common trope in a lot of sci-fi. You just see, I mean, Star Trek, Star Wars, Mass Effect, Starfinder. I'm sure is mostly. I'm not as familiar, but one of I know there's a lot of humanoid races. So it's just kind of, yeah, we've all kind of just in the ethos said we're shaped like this, so that's how life designed bodies. So we've all adapted to that.
Sure.
So I think that does make the cuddle a lot easier to make a playable race, keeping a lot of their cool backstory stuff. Um, their suits, whether or not we like we're kind of getting away from the like the globe that goes to the different suits. Maybe they have some sort of cool mechanical something. It's probably not going to be available to the player as like a racial feature, but it'll be something to just kind of symbolize what the cuddle are and how they've grown into this tech-based society. And it'll be cool and different, but it won't have to be like, yeah, I want the cuddle to this thing. Because just talking about it now, that is an excellent question. Do the cuddle build their humanoid suits to be roughly the same strength and durability as another human person? Or is this cuddle got an edge because his suit is stronger because it's a machine? So moving away from that concept kind of
Mm-hmm.
helps erase some of those questions. And then you don't have the person who picked cuddle because they were like, well, yeah, I'm going to be fish Iron Man all the
Sure.
time.
So, what do you think about changing the playable race name to just Sicarian instead of Cuddle?
Yeah,
Does that work? Or do we give them a different racial name? I mean,
we can do it either way because I mean, you would be aptly describing us if we were meeting aliens as humans, Earthlings.
Mm-hmm.
You could probably call us Terrans. That's very common in sci-fi. It's what we've been calling the humanoid race so far, because it's based on Earth. So Sakarian, they would all be Sakarian for living on Sakar. It's just a question: do we want an alternate name for the race, the way there's Earthling and human,
Sure.
or do we want to just call them Sakarian? And
Okay.
it's a question of what I guess as we kind of write their story, they're the ones naming themselves. So maybe they're influenced by that Terran technology to pick a name that makes sense. Maybe there was an old research station. They named themselves after the kind of like the station that was the accident site that was the progenitor of their species.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever kind of theme. So for now, Sakarian is a good start, and honestly, it's a good end point if we don't ever change it.
Sure.
But for now, yeah, it's definitely. I think changing it to Sakarian is good. Just kind of highlights some of the. Gosh, deving is cool. We just made a whole big structure change, and it's not completely defined, and it's going to grow from there. But I just love that we. Deving is cool. Come to our Discord.
Come join the team. Love it.
One of my favorite parts of doing this is multiple times every episode I'll just step back and realize just kind of the conversation and kind of just the drastic world of changes that's going to grow into, and it's very cool. But yes, Anyway, long-winded way of saying I'm on board with Sakarian as a name.
Okay, cool. I'll go through later and edit the book. I switched it in roll 20. I really like the image of the Abe thing with the bubble tubes, or the bubbles of water on the gill thing. I have like a whole neck thing. That being the suit. Like I like that idea. Okay. That solves a lot of problems, and maybe they have web hands even. But they still have fingers, so they could then do the element. I think that's where that all came from, was the talking about the hand
that's
seals.
where it started, was the idea of the hand signs. And yeah, they very well might, especially if they're used to living in water and swimming around, it would make a lot of sense. But yeah, I mean, if you look at that same example of Abe, he's got web hands, but he can manipulate his fingers just fine. So
and
I
then
think that works.
Yeah, then the Coleoptera, maybe we just do 2 main appendages for the arms. And then maybe having some smaller ones would be cool for like holding on to a thing, but not necessarily like complex things. Like it couldn't solve a Rubik's Cube or pick a lock, so it's not like giving them an unfair advantage, but it's just a cool additional feature where they got these little things that could maybe like, I got these pliers. All right, hold that little hand, while I'm doing this thing, and I could just reach down and grab it from myself. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I'm good. It's just kind of a utility feature without having a whole lot of extra
action economy changing thing.
Yeah, so might be the thing where insertions you can carry a little bit more because you got an extra pair of hands. It's not world breaking, but that is very cool. Just picturing somebody. Like I was picturing working on a car, but I'm also picturing just like an artist painting a scene.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got you're holding an array of brushes right here. You're just easily swapping shit out.
Right. Those aren't the ones painting, but it's holding the tools. That kind of thing.
You just have essentially an assistant who's limited to the realm of hold this.
Yeah. Exactly. Is limited to this, not like articulate motion.
And then maybe basic stuff. Okay, like tie that for me. Like we'll find what sounds appropriate as a range, but some basic actions that can kind of help you out and let you be a little bit more efficient.
Okay.
Which is very cool. Because if we gave them a full set of arms, I think they would have to be relegated to, yeah, you got an extra pair of arms, but your right hands move as a unit, your left hands move as a unit. And that would get weird and complicated.
Sure.
I like the utility hands better.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole Machamp thing, it would be really cool, but my first thing is that's what I would play, and everything else is inferior, which we don't want to have for any of the races. I'm good at this, bad at that, got these features, but essentially I'm pretty much the same as everybody else.
And by not giving them that, if we do allow the possibility of extra cybernetic limbs, well, that's available to anybody.
That's exactly. It'd be to everybody and not one race who just get it right off the bat.
Lets you open up to that possibility. other thought I had is, and you could even still regulate them to be like smaller, less dexterous. I do like the idea of giving them insectoid hands. So you might have a pair that can like still grasp things, like it's just a pincer. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, yeah, it can hold a thing, and maybe it can cut a thing. So,
Oh, like you're holding a rope, you could just lower it down and it could just, like, oh, thanks,
so essentially, you've just got whatever, like just the kind of beetly pincers.
Sure. But then if you put on normal body armor, it's going to conceal those inside anyway. So that's assuming that you're exposed.
Yeah, or in whatever clothing built to accommodate you, just in everyday clothes. But yeah, essentially we would have to work it into, like, yeah, they collapse in, they fold flat, whatever. It's not hard we're making it up. So
Sure. Sure. Okay. I like it.
but yeah, it's a fun little extra thing without being a crazy extra thing.
All right. Well, we can definitely come back to the ship stuff. I was wanting to run through the Rogue Trader and the Starfinder thing, but where we're at for time, I think that's probably a better thing to actually like open up with, because it's gonna be a whole can of worms. So
Sure. And we're looking at the starship section of each book is the concept.
yes, so
Okay.
it's
Well, that if you want to push that off and open with it
yeah,
next week,
I think
that
would be
will
be a good thing. Maybe we can.
cool. That'll give me time to read through them a little more
Exactly.
thoroughly, and then we'll kind of come from a place of knowing things. Um, the other thing I'm going to look at just to compare, and this is purely stats wise, I have used a couple times. I think I mentioned it before. Someone made a very good Mass Effect skin for 5e rules. So it looks like these have some very intricate rules on like how spaceships function.
Mm-hmm.
These have less so. There's some in there, but mostly it's kind of like comparing the. And this will have it too. So this is just a third reference point.
Sure. Yeah, more the merrier.
And also
yeah.
just plug in Mass Effect 5e because it's very fun. I haven't played a lot of it, but it's very cool. Anyway, mostly I'm looking at it to compare the hit points of a ship versus the hit point of a person, and then the damage of a ship's gun versus the damage of a person's gun.
I think it should be in a totally different league.
Yes, and theirs is. So I'm sure Rogue Trader and Starfinder do the same thing. I'm just using it as a third reference point because I want to kind of find ratios and say this is 10 times more powerful or 100 times more powerful, and try and dial in what sounds right in those systems and what we would use for ours.
Right. I do know that from what I could find from the what's it called? Not Dark Heresy. What's the one I'm talking about? The Rogue Trader. That what they do is, because these ships are enormous, like your average ship in this system would be like the larger size ones for what we're talking about. Sure. But because they have so many turrets and these weapon batteries and everything across the sides of both sides of the ship, instead of making each of them be its own separate attack, you just do one for all of it. So they call it representation, I think. So it's just one thing to do a whole bunch of things. So.
And I'm still working on making adjustments to account for the skill bonus onto that kind of base roll chart I had made. They're going to adjust for a scale of 140. And so far, what I've been doing, I'm going to kind of finish it out and then kind of see how we like it from there. But essentially, I just need to add 40 into the scale. So what I've been doing, kind of you had suggested, like in looking at what percentage.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, one of the rows that's done, the possible chart for the highest skill, it was roughly 15% chance of critical failure.
Mm-hmm.
So I just took 15% of 40 and
of 140.
stacked that right around there.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
So we added, I want to say that's 6. So I added 6 to the value, bumped to the next starting chain up to reflect its new minimum, and then looked at what that percentage value was. So I just broke 40 into the same percentage points and increased each one by the relative amount. So all the proportions of
they're still the same. Yeah,
should still be roughly equal, but we're adjusting for the new thing, and then it appropriately means that to get a critical success on a impossible task, if you're as good as you can be, you got to get a 137 on a 100-sided die. So you better have a damn good bonus. Now,
Right.
a success starts at 106. That's a lot more plausible for a master craftsman or a master whatever
Sure.
type of check it is. 106 is a lot more doable for somebody with a bonus, but still, you got to roll over 100.
But it's
So I
still
think,
unobtainable for a low person doing an impossible task. It should be impossible,
yeah,
essentially. Yeah.
yes. And then
That's good.
exactly that kind of thing. And then I'm going to go through the other ones. So what was my point? Oh, my point was that we have ranges of success on there. So for the kind of idea of having a wide battery of guns rather than having to roll for all of them, we had that partial success, critical success in there.
Mm-hmm.
You roll a crit success, damn, the overwhelming majority of your turrets were right on the mark.
Sure.
Partial success, all right, 50-50 or
Sure.
60-40.
Sure.
40% of your guns hit. You're going to do this kind of damage. Success, yeah, most of what you were shooting hit its target. Things like that.
And just because it hit doesn't mean it's actually going to do damage, because there might be shields, there might be
falling,
armor.
Whole bunch of stuff to consider on both sides there. But having that range of success and failures means that we can kind of work with having that higher quantity of things while having to say, okay, did this gun hit, did this gun hit, did this gun hit.
But then breaking it down into quantity of weapons, the default could just be, I'm aiming at this thing, so they're all, trying to hit that. But say there is a big difference between having one gun that can do 10 damage and 10 guns that can do 1 damage, because say there's a bunch of those slug things, the leeches you're talking about, say there's 20 slugs, having a mechanical differential of these 10 guns is far superior that do 1 damage, because you could hit multiple targets. Say they only have 1 health, you know what I'm saying? So coming up with a way to do that too, where yes, you could attack them all as a group in brackets, but you can also try to do some kind of skill shot to spread them out. But then you also got the skill of how do you target that many in one go? I don't know, but having options for the systems.
Yeah, and at first blush, there would be enough for the whole thing, but the idea of like a targeting aspect of weapons, say this is its targeting rating, is it single, is it multi, and how effective kind of thing. So it might be like, yeah, you have 1 gun, you can't shoot 2 things with 1 gun, figure it out. You got 10 guns, you can shoot 10 different things, you can shoot 1 thing.
Sure.
So that's going to mess with your damage ratios, and if you're trying to shoot 10 different things, well, that's a much harder thing to do than point 10 guns at 1 target.
What do you think of this part real quick? So, like say with Star Trek, you can shoot your phasers or photons for the most part in any direction. For the most part. But in the Rogue Trader, they call it a lance. So it's like, a knight with a big fucking stick. Goes in one direction, right? So the ships go forward, they can slowly turn, but it's mostly where you're facing, that's where your primary gun, your lance, is faced. So wherever you want to shoot it, you literally have to be pointing it at it. And then they're like long cylindric ships, and then through the sides is all these turrets, and those are essentially defensive things with very, very short range. So say shooting down torpedoes coming at you, or little ships that are trying to fly and board or fuck around with stuff. They're pretty much just for anything close range, destroying those, but they can't shoot very far. And then the primary one is the lance. So what do you think of the differences between those two for our system? Do you like the idea of just what do you see, what's in range, kind of like D&D with spells, you can shoot it any way, or do you want it to be like which way is the ship facing on the hex grid?
I think there's
both.
I think there's going to be a difference between the 2 types of weapons. I'm just going to catch myself looking at you on my screen and then not into it.
I do that all the time. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Sorry, I just got self-conscious for a second. But the idea of a trade-off, and I think the more nimble the targeting capabilities, the more maneuverability you have, the less damage you're going to have. like it's going to be similar to the idea of in D&D terms trading off maneuverability for protection of plate armor. You're not going to be able to jump and run around as much because you're wearing a big old pile of metal, but you're going to be wearing a big old pile of metal when someone tries to hit you with something.
Sure.
So the idea that a fixed point gun allows us to ensure whatever jargon we want to use, just kind of fixed power connections, something that's more stable, more secure. So we can run a lot more through this pointing one way than I can run to this, which needs to be able to twist and bend and move.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that guns trade off in those two aspects, and that, I mean, in theory, it's sci-fi tech. You could probably have a pretty strong gun that's also maneuverable. But when you increase both of those things, cost gets like exponentially higher.
Mm.
So it's like, yeah, a gun that's just giving it a scale of 1 to 10, got a level 3 of maneuverability and a level 5 of just power would cost roughly the same as if I flipped those two numbers.
Right.
But then if I jumped both values up to 6, that's going to be
exponentially more expensive.
Categories
right.
above.
Just for one extra point, right?
Because of the extra stuff that had to go into making sure that
the power consumption,
power supply,
it could be exponentially higher. The amount of physical space the rest of it takes to move that one. Yeah, okay.
And I would imagine that the kind of complication of doing that, if we're adding, I don't know if we're going to add a risk factor to say there's a chance this might fail.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that goes up when you try and increase the numbers together.
Okay. What do you think about having separation pieces of ships, like the saucer section? You know, that carries all the people or whatever, and then there's the part with all the fucking fight and shit on Star Trek. Or like in Rogue Trader, there ships have like a top section that can kind of break off while the main part is the battle piece. What do you think of that? It does open up a whole bunch of problems, that would need to be solved. Not that it isn't solvable.
No, there's definitely some thought that needs to go into that. The question becomes, do we want to decide practicality of starships and say these are the bounds of reality for the system we make?
Mm-hmm.
Or do we want to say, here's the design system we've laid out, this is modular, you take these pieces, you build them a starship, and you define how it works. So in theory, if I had a modular thing, I could kind of take the appropriate chunks of spaceship and repeat them, and essentially say I've got this piece that helps control a ship, this piece that helps hold people, and this piece that helps thrust it, and build that section, and then just kind of repeat that section. And then in the event of something going catastrophically wrong,
mm-hmm.
they all break, and now I've got 10 little ships because I've compartmentalized all my pieces. But that's a lot of theater of their mind, and me saying, yep, I took all the pieces and this is how I imagine it works. Or do we say, yeah, to make a ship work, you got to have a big ass engine and a big ass thruster that sits here. Your pieces attached to a frame.
Sure.
And so, in theory, really any of it works. It's just going to be what we want to set as a base guideline. So, I don't hate leaving it modular and kind of up to you as the player. It's a lot of fun, a lot of creativity, but then the issue there is that you're going to have to kind of say, this is how we decide it works, and we have to remember how it works. So since anyone can do that anyway, with any system they want, say, we don't like how this is done, we're going to do it our way. I think it makes the most sense to kind of
make it our way.
Talking about modular, I think we need to come up with a frame, essentially, for all ships and say, here are the core components. They can be structured in this one way, in these handful of ways, whatever we go with. Because we can maybe say that, yeah, a civilian class ship is it's got these parts connected. A military class ship maybe compartmentalizes them, separates them for
Sure.
whatever reason.
Right. Yeah, I don't like the idea of like half the ship just separating and then now you have two ships. I like the idea of like to have a ship pulling other ships, it's going to be the scale of the other smaller ones will be so tiny. Because of all the other things you got to have, like a bigger engine to move a bigger ship. More crew quarters, more everything else is going to need to be physically much bigger that say your storage is maybe maximum, I'm just guessing, 30% of your total ship size. So if you carried one ship, it could maximum be 30% the size, but that's not very smart to only have one. Like if you're gonna be doing that, you might as well have, say, for instance, having 3 10% or 6 5%. You know what I'm saying? Like to where and then whatever you go down to, obviously it would be for like one or two people for these tiny things. So then this thing physically would have to be enormous to be able to hold 6 one-person vessels. Like the physical storage capacity. You know what I'm saying? So like taking into the scales, and we could, if we did the tier 1, 2, 3, 4 for the affinities, that could be a thing we talk. We could use too. Is like the tier 1s are the smaller ones. A tier 2 couldn't hold a tier 1, but a tier 3 could hold this many or whatever. Something along those lines for scale size.
Yeah, we definitely want to have a category of size. I'm saying they can do this. Now, just in my head, picturing like the ship breaking off from the other ship. That, I think, could make sense, but not as a system where now you have two ships. Systems are like, if you did that instead of an escape pod, essentially, you have like an emergency portion. I'm picturing Guardians of the Galaxy, like a tiny chunk of the ship just flew off. That's just garbage now. So, I mean, that would have to be a section of escape options. There would be standard escape pods, and maybe you could do escape shuttle if you wanted to call that a subsystem. So now you've got a maneuverable ship, but now you're crowded, you have less storage, you have less like rations, power, all that, and you're not going to move as fast or be as durable. But you can guide yourself to safety versus just, pooh, I got launched and something.
Right, just a projectile flying, hopefully.
So that to me is a feature of a ship. But yeah, we'll have to kind of work out what we want to call the sizes. And that's going to be kind of another question called whether we want to say smaller ships can't have multiple affinities, or is that going to be kind of the software thing where you could have, like the guild build a class 4 affinity, but it's going to be
tiny.
I don't know, a strike fighter, whatever we call the classification of a one-man pilot. So we can tie them together. We could look at them separately. That's something we're going to have to decide on. But what we'll want to do for sure, we're going to want to do all of it, but what we'll want to do
that's why it's going to take a long time.
the class system for sizes to say, yep, this ship is this big. It needs this many people to run. It can hold this many people maximum. Its storage bay can hold this much space. So if you want to carry these whatever ships, they got to fit in that. And then we'll come up with dimensions for the various class size that they're roughly this many cubic feet, meters, whatever system we use.
Sure.
So yeah, I think it makes sense to establish a framework and say it's got to have these parts to run. They come in this configuration or these basic configurations if we want to come up with a handful. And then it has room for X amount of modification.
Okay.
So then that's how you get to customize your ship. It's like, yeah, these areas of the ship are there. They are nothing. They get to be something if you want to make them something.
Right.
So then you throw in a med bay, you throw in a scanner room, you throw in whatever.
Okay. And yeah, before we get too far into starships, we also need to think about the part where we talked about we wanted not only elemental affinities to have roles on the ship, but also classes. we were talking about each class is going to have a thing to offer the ship
Yes.
over a random person. Like a thing that they can do too. So I think it'll be good to start with starships, but still keep it in the big picture concept. Get a good understanding of that, then pause that, and then come back to the classes and say these are some things. All they say, how many classes do we have? Do you remember? I don't really
A
like
number, but I can.
One, two, three, four, five, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we got 9 at the moment. So there'll be, or 8, because the first one was classes. Yeah, 8. So there would need to be 8 stations essentially at a ship, one for each class. Or can a hunter and a soldier either, they could both occupy the gun, so then it's 7, or you know what I mean. We need to look at how many to have versus how we want the affinities to work. Is it 5? Is it 7? Is it 3? I don't know. So we'll need to take that into consideration as well.
What I think, as we kind of, because we're looking at this modular system, so if we come up with a framework that say this is what a ship needs to run, and then these are the extras that can be added on module style. I think as we look at those, we'll need to look at the core systems to see if they should have any sort of affinity connection, and if they should have any sort of class special features. Say, okay, you have the engines, because every ship's going to need an engine. Maybe it's tied to air, because that makes things move. And maybe the kind of the mechanic engineer, we had somebody that was more techie. Maybe they can have a special feature. So I think that's kind of how we should approach it. That's how, at least how my brain's working on it, and we'll kind of we'll obviously refine it as we go. But I think as we kind of narrow down, here's what the basic of every ship is, and then here's what we think we want to include as options to add.
Okay.
For each facet of a ship, as we kind of finalize it, we should say, does it have an elemental affinity? Does it need one? Because maybe not all of them do. So maybe it has a potential elemental affinity, which would only be for the guild ships that have that guild programming. And so yes, if it's got the programming, it would be a water affinity. And then as we're doing that, we also say, does it have any sort of class requirement, or maybe class bonus? So it's like, yeah, the guns can be used by anyone who can pull a trigger. But if you've got a warrior or a hunter, somebody who regularly uses weapons, they get this action they can take with the guns. So maybe it's the same. So maybe you say that, like, I don't know, iron sights, fine tuning, something, we name it. So it's like, yeah, these kind of people that have experience with guns can take a minute and aim it more properly, or like adjust the aiming mechanism to them,
push
to
it beyond its
themselves,
normal intended limits, or
however you want to phrase it. Or you could say,
or have guild training of knowing things like
yeah,
this maneuver or this whatever.
Alternatively, you could say, okay, these are guns. It makes sense for this class, and this class to be able to use them in a special way. Now, you could say this is a feature that's only accessible to these 3 classes, or you could say the warrior can push it past, can fine tune the aiming. He's got training with guns. He can access the like acceleration dampeners or something, whatever we call it, so that his aim is more steady. If a hunter uses this gun, he can use the overload feature, because hunters are constantly powering up their guns. So we could either say there's an extra feature that only certain, like a gun has X feature, these classes can use it, or we can say these classes use guns, here's what each class could do with a gun that other classes can't. So it's just going to be that flip side.
So it'll be, yeah, I like that, where the classes will modify the base ship, just like, yeah, okay.
So essentially, just as we look at what systems we want to include for ships, we can kind of go, does it have an elemental affinity? And are there any classes that should have extra capabilities with this system?
So essentially,
is it just one?
Yeah, a ship that the party has is going to be a collective character sheet, essentially.
Yeah.
That they have their own background, their own racial modification, they have their own this, that, this, and that to make their thing. And then all of those each contribute to this ship. So instead of its backstory, that's based on the biohacker. You know, they have all these different things that influence the total amount of feats that this ship can do, and whoever was captaining it essentially would look at this character sheet and be like, this is what we can do. All right, gunners, target, whatever, that blah blah, you know, and like would look at the character sheet essentially and command.
So yeah, they could build a ship together, and each system, this is the word we're using now, would each have its own capabilities. So any group could get on the ship and it would do these things.
Right.
And then this system, if you have a warrior, can do this. If you have a hunter, can do this.
Right.
And so on and so forth for each system. So some systems might just be like, yeah, this system does this. It does this all the time. That's what the system does. And then some systems might be like, yeah, if you have this class specifically, they can do this extra thing. Or guns are pretty general. These classes that know how to use guns, each can use it in a way that other people couldn't.
I like it.
So as we kind of pick out systems, we'll kind of figure out if any class should have a special ability, which ones, and then define it is how I'm approaching it in my brain.
Sure. I love it. Awesome. Is that a good stopping point for this week? Or is there anything else you want to go over?
No, I think we've kind of hit a spot where we can kind of leave it off without leaving too many, like, but they were just on the cusp of kind of moment. So I think if we come in looking at the Rogue Trader and Starfinder stuff, I can give it a second look because I did look at it briefly, but I was mostly figuring out internet stuff.
Sure. Yep.
I can give that a more thorough look for next week.
I mean, I was even looking at it for a little bit, and it's still like I have no idea what the fuck I'm looking at. You know, like so it takes a while to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. So we can familiarize ourselves with that. I will finish up the roll chart because that got away from me this week.
Sure.
While I was lifing. So. Yeah, I think we're at a good point, and then we've got a good plan on where we want to start next week. So I think we're at a good stop overall.
So what do we go? We went over magic in the system a little bit. Went over neural implants. We went over the enemies. Over the enemy factions. Talked a little bit about the starship stuff, and that's probably what we'll try to hit in. If any of the enemy things sound fun for you, and you want to think of any more ideas, feel free during the week to work on those. But this is World Building with Total Tabletop. We meet every Saturday at 10 a.m. Well, at least for now. We're meeting at Saturdays at 10 a.m. where we're building our own system from scratch, and we love having your guys' your thoughts. So all the help, I mean, there's several things that chat was saying that helped us out. So that was fantastic. We love you guys helping us out. If you want to join our team, we are taking applications. Down below on our Twitch page is the link to our Discord, and there is where you can fill out the application and apply. We definitely are looking for more people. Let's see what else. We got lots of great shows on the channel. We got Ages Past on Sundays. Mondays, they are working on a Dark Heresy game. Tuesdays, we have Horseman of the Apocalypse. Wednesdays, we have Rise of Unity, which is going to premiere this Wednesday. We're going to start streaming.
Very exciting. We
were going to keep just recording, but we're ready to start streaming. So we're going to be doing that on Wednesdays. Hopefully more things can start coming. We got guild games, lots of fun stuff, guys. If you're watching this on our YouTube, let's see, we're trying to grow that. So that's something we're trying to focus in. So like the video and subscribe. If you're here on Twitch catching us live, we really appreciate it. Follow the channel, click the notification bell, and that's pretty much it. We'll catch you guys next time.